Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting of the San Carlos City Council and successor agency to the redevelopment agency to order. And the first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance, which I believe is going to be led by Boy Scout Troop 321. Gentlemen.
Will the audience please rise for the presentation of the colors? Color guard front and center. Prepare to present the colors. Color guard advance.
The audience, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Two.
Color guard, post the colors.
Color guard retreat. Color guard dismissed. The audience may be seated.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda tonight, Mr. City Manager?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
And next is a report from closed session. Mr. Rubens, do we have a report?
Well, as I reported out of the closed session before this meeting, on one of the items, the City Council, specifically the Canis versus City of San Carlos matter, the Council authorized me to pursue a writ of a recent Superior Court decision overruling our demur. The vote was 5 authorized me to do that, and the case involves a writ of mandate and an inverse condemnation claim against the City of San Carlos.
All right. Thank you.
Report.
Thank you. All right. Now on to council communications and announcements. Council communications and announcements are brief items from members of the council regarding upcoming events in the community and correspondence that they have received. They are informal in nature and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. Why don't we start with Mr. Griselli?
Get this thing to work. Mr. Mayor, thank you. I only have one item tonight. Stay on. Stay. I attended the other evening a meeting of the City and County Association of Government, CCAG, and at that meeting there was a presentation by some folks and also some information of some workshops that are coming up for a thing called Community Choice Aggregation, CCA. And what really that is in English is it's a mechanism by which local governments can assume responsibility for providing electrical power for residential and commercial customers in their jurisdiction in partnership with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. The county is going to be having a workshop, and it's going to be on, there's actually two sessions of it. It's going to be Wednesday, January 28th. The first one will be at the South San Francisco Municipal Services Building at 33 Arroyo Drive in South San Francisco, and that session goes from 9:30 until noontime. The second session is going to be at the Redwood City Hall, which would be at 1017 Middlefield Road in Redwood City, and that presentation will go from 1:30 to 4. And this is there's going to be information about this, questions can be asked, describing the issue first, setting the context, explaining how there are other situations in Marin and Sonoma counties that are already using this CCA, how it would work in California, and then other steps that may go from there, and then there's a chance for questions. So I want to make sure everybody's aware of this situation that was brought up to all 20 cities the other evening at our meeting and the county. And there is going to be discussion about this, very, very preliminary discussion, but information about what community choice aggregation is and how it might work in San Mateo County. It is already in operation in Sonoma and Marin counties. So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Matt?
I attended a meeting with a developer, and I'm not sure how to handle this exactly. It has to do with a property that's next door to where I live. So I suppose if anything were talked about on the issue, if it were to be on the dais, would mean that I would probably have to recuse myself, even though it's not my property. I lease the property, but the city attorney could advise on that. But the reason I bring it up is because I did meet with the developer. The Al Survey had told me about it and had told me that the developer was trying to get in touch with me. So I went and met with him over the Christmas holiday. And one of the things I was concerned in looking at the project is has to do with our zoning that we passed recently and what it does to a project like this. On the one hand, if they do residential only, the setbacks on a property that's 50 foot wide would pretty much mean no project at all. And yet, if they incorporate, it's zoned for mixed use, so they can have a commercial element to it, which they've put in there. That changes the site setbacks and makes it a viable project. But on the front setback, it means it has to come within a minimum of 0 to a maximum of 5 feet from the sidewalk. And I can tell you, by living on that block, that would be a disaster because of sight lines with vehicles pulling out of the garage and so forth, and it just would be completely out of context with that block of Walnut Street. All the other buildings are 15 feet or more back from the sidewalk, including the Samtrans building, which is right on the corner. So if there's a way we could bring that forward to the council, even forgetting about this project, but just looking at what we've done with that piece of zoning and potentially change it, because I don't think it is a very good application on Walnut Street. And I think if you looked at other properties that are in the mixed use zoning, it's probably not a good idea either, because just the idea of having a building at 0 lot line on the front, and you think about vehicles pulling in and out, that's probably not a good idea. It's the reason, for instance, that we have, the thing about shrubs and fences and so forth being at 3 feet for a certain distance, and then they can go up from there. So if there's a way that we could bring that in front of the council, I would appreciate it. And if another council member is interested in having that on the dais.
All right. Before I ask, I'd just like to ask Jeff, is there anything that you can add to this particular zoning issue? I mean, it sounds like obviously a zoning issue. Would we be making a change?
Well, if you were to bring the item back, I think what Councilmember Grocott is saying, he would like the council to consider making a change. I think Matt actually did a very good job in describing it. That's the current zoning that's been adopted by the city council, as Matt described, with the mixed-use development. The idea is that you want that, the city wants that commercial property to be close to the sidewalk at the bottom. And so, that's what the developer has proposed. I think, really just beyond sort of the description of the facts on the ground today, we'd need to agendize it to have any more discussion beyond that, as this item is not on the agenda tonight.
All right. Well, given all that, is there any other council members that would like to second Matt's motion to put it on the agenda?
I guess, if I may, I have a question. I know staff has been working on bringing forward a number of adjustments to various zoning rules throughout the city, or in certain areas of the city. Can this perhaps be folded into that? I know it's coming in late in the process, but
What you would need to do first, I mean, the council could have a general discussion about this, but ultimately it would need to be referred to the Planning Commission if you were going to make this zoning change. And the Planning Commission's already sort of moved past that point, so those decisions are already headed to the dais. So it would really, at this point, have to be a separate standalone process.
Mr. Mayor, I have no objection to having asking the Planning Commission to review this situation as Matt has outlined it and see if they have, if there's a recommendation they want to send forward to the council for a change. It sounds to me like that's the process we both have to and should follow anyway.
Matt, are you all right with that?
Sure. Sounds.
All right. Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one brief item. I met with some representatives from the east side of San Carlos, some people who live along Holly Street, and some other parts of the city during the month of December during our holiday break. And it was a good discussion. We talked about a number of different things, including Holly Street parking situation and the impact that the changes we've made have been having on neighbors, but nothing really further to report from that. I do, however, have one quick favor of staff. If it's possible for somebody to reboot my computer, which is currently dead, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple things to report on. I had a very productive meeting between Samtrans and a couple members of the East Side neighborhood. And I know my colleagues will recall that when we decided to move forward with the Transit Village, one of the stipulations of that project was that we move all the shuttles and taxis over to the west side of the station. We subsequently made a decision to move a couple Samtrans shuttles back over to the east side, and one of the things that I asked for when we did that is to have a meeting with the neighborhood to talk about the potential impact that could have. So we finally did have that meeting. There were 3 people from Samtrans. There was a couple folks from the east side. Jay and Al were there from the city staff, and there was a member of the sheriff's office there. It was very productive. Samtrans did a good job of proactively putting together a plan for how the shuttles are going to go and ways in which residents can contact Samtrans if they see something that if the shuttles are doing something that they shouldn't be doing. The member of the sheriff's office laid out an enforcement policy in case taxis attempt to move back over to the east side, et cetera. So anyway, and I want to commend the staff. They did a really good job of kind of coming with a very sort of positive and proactive attitude and came up with a lot of good ideas for just generally improving the condition of the station. So that was, I think, a good step forward on what was at one time a fairly contentious issue. The other thing I wanted to report on was, as many people are aware, there is a proposal from the Sequoia Union High School District to build what they're calling a linked learning high school in San Carlos. This would be a small high school of about 400 students. It would be linked to a specific industry. They're proposing to build 2 of these schools, one in Menlo Park, which is going to be linked to kind of the computer software industry, and one in San Carlos, which no decisions have been made, but there's been discussion of linking it to the medicine, life, biosciences industry. Mark and I met with the superintendent before Christmas, and then recently I have spoken to a couple board members from the high school district. And I'm supportive generally of the idea of building this kind of high school in San Carlos, but the location that they've chosen, and I should say the district has recently closed on a piece of property that is essentially on the corner of Old County Road and Holly Street and is adjacent to Loyola Park. So they purchased this property. I have grown concerned that it is not a great location because of just already major traffic congestion problems on Holly Street, and we have the addition of a hotel coming. We have the addition of the Transit Village coming. And then I've raised some concerns with them that there has been kind of inadequate public outreach. A lot of people read about this for the first time in the newspaper, and there were no public meetings held in San Carlos prior to moving forward with the purchase. So I listened to them, and we had some good dialogue, but it seems at this point that they're moving forward with the process of trying to put a school there. So what I wanted to propose to my colleagues is, if indeed my colleagues share the same concerns, I thought it might be appropriate to send some kind of formal communication. I was thinking potentially of a letter from the City Council raising the concern about that location and sharing kind of the special information that we have, having dealing with the Holly Street corridor now for many years, as well as encouraging them to do further public outreach. So I wanted to see if anyone would be interested in potentially bringing that kind of a letter back up before the dais.
Mr. Mayor, through the chair, this is something I think that we probably need to bring back because there's enough specificity and direction that this is probably not the agenda item to put it on. I think we should post this type of thing and put it on for a discussion at the next meeting if you want to direct staff. Normally what we do is we can try and anticipate some of the council concerns and then prepare a draft letter. There's been a lot of discussion already in the press and out there with public concerns. So we could bring a letter back to you for you to consider at a future meeting, and then you can discuss that and add or subtract things from that letter.
That's what I was proposing.
All right.
I would certainly support, having raised similar concerns myself before and working with Cameron on this, I would certainly support bringing that back. I'd actually like to see it be a somewhat broader discussion than the drafting of a response, although I think that's necessary. I think we had talked earlier about getting some input from staff on what other options there might be to see if there might be a way to work with the school district to find an alternative site.
All right. Anything else, Cameron?
That's it.
All right. Thank you. I just have a couple things. It's kind of a slow month. Went to a Council of Cities dinner in December, which was held up in Colma, and at that meeting, a lot of new representatives from the cities are chosen for the various boards and commissions that council members sit on in the Bay Area. The next thing I'd like to bring up is that last month, I think, or was it late November, we lost sort of a very treasured part of our community in Frank Harrington. I used to see Frank myself at Starbucks all the time. I was impressed that he was always around, walked the streets. It seemed that everybody knew him. I just think he was, I think he was a wonderful guy. I asked for some background on him. I knew he'd been in law enforcement, but I didn't know that he'd been in San Mateo County for 50 years, spent 45 years in law enforcement, the longest serving volunteer in San Carlos. He was the only person singled out for a council proclamation during the transition. And he didn't want to be called a volunteer, but he wouldn't accept any money. I guess the city or the sheriff's department offered to pay him. He said, I don't want to be paid, which I just find incredible. So what I would like to propose is that we agendize a discussion to talk about renaming Laurel Park after Frank Harrington. And I'd like to see if any of my fellow council members would agree with that. That may be a worthy thing to talk about.
Down here, I would.
I'm sorry?
I said I would.
Okay. All right. So we'll bring that back, and maybe we'll have a new name for that park in the near future. All right. The last thing I had is that for a long time we've had a practice on this council of when other council members or when council members wanted a various item brought up to be placed on an agenda, it always took 3 votes to place that item on the agenda. For the last couple of years, I guess that vote has been a 2-vote agenda. The interesting thing in here is what I'd like to do is return to the 3-vote protocol. It only takes, I guess, 2 votes to agree to do that at this point. So I thought I would float this to my fellow council members and find out if there is some interest in returning to the 3-vote requirement to agendize any particular item.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with you.
Yeah, I do as well.
I well, I'm not sure if we can have the discussion here or not, or whether we need to agendize it, but I'd be interested in knowing what the thinking is behind making the change.
Well, my interest is just in the expediency of our meetings to make sure that, you know, the things we talk about really have sort of a critical mass of agreement that we should agendize them. That's really the impetus behind my suggestion.
Well, then I'll just say that for my part, I guess I don't have any strong objection to it, but I don't agree with the change for the simple reason that it leaves unmet. That's almost saying that you have to have agreement on an item before you can even discuss it. And, you know, the whole point of discussion is that once in a while we change each other's minds. But we have to have two votes, you know, there have to be two people to actually have an item in consideration. Right. So.
Right. Well, Mr. City, is there anything else that we need to do? All right, so we'll bring that back.
Yeah, we'll agendize this so that you can actually have the discussion and make the decision and at a future agenda.
Okay, great. All right, I don't have anything else. And I know, Mr. Grisilli, you did have one other point you wanted to bring up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize. When Mr. Johnson brought up the school item, to make sure, full disclosure, I also had a meeting with some folks from the east side relative to the school district's planning to build a school on on Old County Road near Holly. And I actually went to a school board meeting and spoke, but not as a council member and not representing this council, just as an individual. And all I indicated to those folks was what we had talked about doing about parking permits and also about the traffic on Old County at the moment. And I asked them to consider all those items when they were making their decision. So I just want to make sure that the record shows that's all I did, and again spoke as an individual, not as a representative of this council or as a council member. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you. You just reminded me that I also had a meeting with a couple of representatives from the east side on the school and the traffic issues on Holly Street in December. All right. Do we have any staff comments on city administrative business?
Mr. Mayor, the Vice Mayor stole most of my thunder, as I was going to provide you with an update on the high school. So just to reiterate what Cameron had said earlier, the high school district did close on the property on Old County Road, last week. In talking to the superintendent, I understand that they're still looking for additional property on the east side. We'll still be in discussions with them to the extent that they're interested in our perspectives at the staff level. And I understand that the staff at the high school district, it sounds like, is going to be shifting gears now a little bit and focusing on their new magnet campus in Menlo Park, and that they're planning on staging rather than trying to attempt both campuses at the same time. They're going to stage them, and that's where their focus is going to be moving forward. So absent of any additional property acquisitions that the school district might make in town, it could get a little bit quiet on this issue for some time, at least from the high school district's perspective, as they focus on Menlo Park.
So no immediate plans for proceeding?
According to the superintendent, they didn't have any immediate plans for proceeding with the planning or construction of the actual facility. They wanted to focus first on their new magnet in Menlo Park. Secondly, just like to wish everybody a Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you. Okay.
Can I just ask, Jeff, do you want to give an announcement about the forums later this week?
Yeah, thank you. Nice reminder. We are in the process of holding Shape San Carlos Community Outreach Forums. We had our first forum with the community at the Adult Community Center Saturday. Our next one is tomorrow night in the library community rooms. I think the doors will be open around 6:30. We'll have food and refreshments for everybody, and love to get a big turnout. Come. We're going to be discussing a number of ideas. It's really kind of a focus group where residents work in small groups to discuss a number of potential bond measure type topics, new parks, roadway construction, those types of general topics as small groups, to provide the council with some feedback on how they might proceed, or if they should proceed at all with a bond measure in the November 2015 election as a possibility. Yeah, so that's what we'll be doing. Hope we get a big turnout. We had about 50 or so people there on Saturday, and we'd like to get even more there Tuesday and Thursday this week.
Great. All right, anything else? All right, thank you. Now we're moving on to item 6, presentations. This is a presentation of a proclamation to Nick Clay, Jeremy Clay, Scott Colnes, and Doug Miller, Boy Scout Troop 321, upon receiving their Eagle Scout Award. And I'm going to come around because I've got 4 proclamations for you. This is the extra fun part of my job. I was a member of Troop 96. Does anybody remember Troop 96? Probably not. I don't know what happened to it. But what I'd like to do at this time, and I'm just going to do this at random, maybe what we should do is have the 4 of you come on up. And I will present these to you one at a time, since I have just 2 hands and one of them's holding a microphone. As I said, I was in Troop 96. I never made it to Eagle Scout. I finished 5 merit badges short, a little slow in getting them. Then I get onto high school, and it was over by that point. So it's quite an accomplishment. How many merit badges does it take now to get an Eagle Scout? 21? In 1964, it was 21. So... and strength of character among its members, and whereas the Boy Scouts play a vital role in the lives of hundreds of boys and young men in the city of San Carlos who are guided by adult volunteers who have given generously of their time and talents, and whereas this special and unique honor of receiving the highest award bestowed by the Boy Scouts was earned by these 4 men. Their names are individually on these proclamations. Of Troop 21 for building a 2-level shed. And did you all do the same thing? I don't think so. And let me just go through them. Doug Muller. Doug built a 2-level shed at the Trinity Presbyterian Nursery School in San Carlos. Scott Colnes built and installed 15 wood deck boxes at a duck club in order to help the management of the wood duck population. I have a good friend I should introduce you to. He's a big duck hunter. And Nick Clay for building garden beds at Arundel Elementary School, which provides an opportunity to teach the students about nature and plants. And finally, to Jeremy Clay for building a barbecue pit at the Envision Shelter Network's Redwood City House, creating a gathering place for families in the house. So, gentlemen, congratulations. It is being in the Boy Scouts is a lot of fun, but it's a lot of hard work. I went on a lot of campouts and hiking trips, but we worked on a lot of projects, and it really teaches you a lot about life. And in this day and age, with all the things going on with after-school sports and video games and all the activities that young people have to do, for these young men to be committed to Boy Scouts, I think is quite impressive, and I just want to congratulate you all. First is Doug. Jeremy? You guys look alike. Thank you. All right. And finally, Scott. Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for coming tonight. You did a great job. Okay. I've just been reminded that these gentlemen have a presentation that you'd like to make. So which one of you would like to begin then? All right, Scott? All four of you? Doesn't matter.
All right. Hey, okay. All right, so as you can see, I made a barbecue pit. I was tasked with doing this by Envision Shelter Network, which their main goal is to take families off the streets and then give the adults jobs and opportunities to give themselves a sustainable income, and then they kind of leave them to kind of live a life like that, or with their new job. And so I was tasked with making the barbecue to kind of foster a meeting area so that the families could meet each other, kind of like have a barbecue, I don't know, watch a football game or something. So I built it mostly out of cinder blocks, and then I also cooked the first hot dogs on it. All right. Next, I guess. All right, so my project was, when I was thinking of trying to get a project, the first thing I thought of was going back to one of my previous schools, either Tierra Linda or Arundel. And so when I went back to Arundel and talked to the principal there, we started talking, and they had some old garden beds that have been there for, like 5 or 10 years or something like that. And so he proposed that I add some more garden beds because he thought that would be a great addition to the program. And so that's what I did. They're 6 feet by 15 feet about. And yeah, I finished the project over summer. So for my project, I decided to build 15 wood duck boxes, and I led 5 adults and 5 scouts in my troop to help me on this project. So to get this project, I went to my dad's duck hunting club, and yeah, it's kind of controversy, like building wood duck boxes for a hunting club. But these wood ducks, they're an endangered species, so we try to help their population at all times. And so I basically had 2 weekends where I first built the materials, or I built the boxes, and then I installed them. And I believe in the past 10 years, with the help of my project, in the past 10 years, the wood duck population has increased twofold. Thank you.
All right. So I built a 2-level shed at Trinity Preschool. The reason behind this was when I approached Mrs. Oxton, she works there. She said all of these 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are having trouble bringing all their sand toys from the previous shed all the way up until the hill where the sandbox was. So she said, why don't you make a sand toy shed right by the sandbox where they can store it all there and just access it whenever they want to. And one difficulty was the shed was on a very steep slope. So that's when we had to design and build a 2-level shed that could handle the different degree of slopes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, we now move on to public comment. Item 7, persons wishing to address the City Council on matters that are not on our posted agenda may do so. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If there are more than 5 individuals wishing to speak on an item during public comment, the mayor will draw 5 speaker cards from those submitted to speak during this time. So far, I only have 1. And the balance of public comment speakers will be called upon at the end of the meeting. If an item you are speaking on is not on the listed agenda, please be advised that the City Council may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed under the Brown Act. The City Council's general policy, though, is to refer items to staff for attention or to have the matter placed on a future City Council agenda for a more comprehensive action or report and formal public discussion and input at that time. All right, I have one speaker card for the general public comment, and that is Dimitri Vandelos.
You want to swivel it around?
Great, thank you. Yeah, the PDF probably is the, unless you have PowerPoint installed. If you could just do it. Great, thank you so much. I'm going to dispense with the formalities and get straight to it because I don't want to get cut off here. Recently, there was a proposal by staff relating to zoning changes in the Loreola Park neighborhood. And that was just last week on Monday. And there was a public notice that was delivered. Unfortunately, it's only 300 feet from the property, so only about 2 to 3 houses maximum at the end of the block ever received the notice. This is something that we've talked about over and over again with staff and council, that this is really inadequate when you're thinking about doing a change that's as big as what was proposed. Within the Planning Commission packet, the only way a person, if they were reading it, and this is how I was first looking at it, is you can look at item B, and there's absolutely nothing that talks about rezoning Industrial Street to allow for hotels. And the actual information, the specific information was buried starting around page 83 of the packet. So it would take an extraordinary effort to find out this information ahead of time. The only way I found out about this was through a newspaper article. Also, the thing that was alarming here, and my intent here was just to say, hey, we need to get better at this. But today, as I was putting this information together, I was really alarmed at what I saw in the packet. In the public notice section of the packet, it states that staff claims that they informed the community and spoke with the East Side Neighborhood Association regarding this zoning change, and also claimed that this was vetted by the community with a presentation to the GESC community. And basically, if you look at that, it says, oh, wow, there was a feedback loop, and things were, kind of working, right? And here's the newspaper article I'm referring to, just as which also talks about, hey, how there was a reaching out to the community. The thing that's really problematic here, though, is none of that information in that packet is correct. There was a landmark hotel meeting, and staff only was discussing a potential hotel north of Holly, and that's what was being referred to, not the zoning changes. There's nothing about rezoning industrial from East San Carlos Avenue was ever presented to any GESC board member that I'm aware of, and I've done a reach out to those people, or to any community members. This packet really reflects a willful misrepresentation of the facts, and misrepresenting what was presented to the community is a violation of public trust, and furthermore, it's a denial of honest services. And I take no pleasure in bringing this out. I'm very alarmed about it. If my claims are incorrect, staff really needs to provide a dated copy of the presentation that they claim was presented to the community. And if my claims are correct, I will be following this presentation up with a formal complaint on conduct. And here's from that packet. What wasn't represented is that is East San Carlos Avenue at the top, where you see a little bit of red. East San Carlos Avenue, Montgomery Street, Cherry Street, Hall Street, and all of those sort of blue with the green outline are the proposed rezoning for hotels. And you can see that it's all along our Loreola neighborhood. And there are some parcels that are immediately in the backyard of folks on Hall Street. Very, very disturbing. So East San Carlos Avenue, Montgomery, Cherry Hall, essentially the entire community south of Holly Street would be impacted by this negatively. I'm including the Planning Commission packet in that USB stick for a record here, and I want to enter that into the public record. And I think that this needs to be followed up. We need to understand why this happened, and I'm making a call that we enact a sunshine ordinance in this community, and this has to be enacted as soon as possible. And you can read those bullet points. It's all about having a more open communication and dialogue, and actually having the city and the city staff serve the public as opposed to other interests, which seem to happen in these closed-door sessions that are occurring with ever-increasing frequency. That's my presentation. I'm deeply alarmed at what I saw happen. I'm very glad that, and I'm concerned that, I was at last Monday's meeting, and it seemed like there was an attempt to squelch community feedback about this occurring in the first place by saying, "Oh, we've taken it off the agenda." I think the problem is that if I hadn't reached out to council members, this would have happened. Nobody would have known. And this is very, very serious. This is a big problem, and I hope council takes this issue very seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitri. Next speaker is Priya Joseph.
Hello. This is the first New Year session. Happy New Year, I guess. I sent a note to a few of you. I had the pleasure of attending the Shape San Carlos sessions. I went with great expectations, but I was pretty underwhelmed and surprised. It was only when Dimitri asked what the last project that was listed, Holly Street Corridor Improvements, what that meant, that I saw Jeff Maltby actually verbalize that it meant taking over the Southside Holly homes. So I've met with so many, city and, council and staff members, and nobody ever said that was on the agenda, that was on the plans. And I've gone back and read through all the alternatives provided by several consultants you've engaged over the years. The last one that I read was from July 10th, 2009. None of them included taking over the homes. And, that was not the alternative that the community wanted. And I've personally proposed several original solutions. Of course, people here think it's because I'm on the street, I'm passionate, and that's why I'm proposing those. No, it's a problem, and people are coming up with original solutions. Look at them for what the solutions bring. It's a growing city. You're not going to get away with just adding one lane. That's not the solution. Dimitri again had sent an email, a New York Times article from 2000 actually. You add a lane, it's only going to get even more congested. It's a growing city. You're going to have to find original solutions. You have to look at it holistically, systematically. Don't go for the low-hanging fruit band-aid, which is going to make it even worse. So I hope you look at it holistically. That's my request. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. All right. Does anyone else wish to speak during public comment? All right. We are going to move now to the consent calendar. These are calendar items. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. So, do we have
Item F.
a motion? Matt?
I turned on my thing, I guess.
Okay.
Your co-pilot needs to help you down there. Item F.
Item F. Okay. Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to approve.
Excuse me, if I may.
I'm sorry?
I believe there was a member of the public who asked for item E to be pulled.
Okay, sorry.
Is it D? It could be. No, it was.
I apologize.
It was Neil Martin and Associates. Correct.
Okay. Item E. And
Well, I asked him, and he said it was.
And that was it? Okay. And I actually am going to ask that item G be pulled as well. So given that, Do we have a motion for the rest of the items?
Let me try this again. Okay, make a motion to approve the consent calendar items A, B, C, D, and H.
I second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Crystal?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right. And I think as per our custom, we will address those items at the end. I guess we'll do that before closed session. All right. Okay. Next item is item 9, public hearing, consideration of adopting a resolution recommending denial of an appeal of the Planning Commission approval of a tentative map parcel for a lot split at 1360 Eaton Avenue, APN 051-378-080, pursuant to the Municipal Code Section 17.44.040.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. 1360 Eden is located at the northeast corner of the intersection with Elm Street, and it's a relatively flat 11,037 square foot lot with a single family residence, which is proposed to be demolished. The properties in the vicinity are single family and zone RS6 single family residential. When the city receives an application for a subdivision, we go through a number of steps to evaluate it, and we're guided by the standards contained in the municipal code, which contain general regulations for subdivisions and findings for approval. We also look at the zoning code, which has lot width and depth requirements, and the general plan, which tells us the land use and density in the California Environmental Quality Act. As you know, we live in a built-out community, and so it's very challenging to add new buildable lots. And when a subdivision is proposed, it does go through a rigorous evaluation, which is carefully thought through and includes public participation in the way of public hearings and a close scrutiny by neighboring property owners. The public process includes the ability for someone to appeal the decision of the Planning Commission for an additional evaluation by the City Council, which is now essentially the final decision-making authority on this. Your decision-making process this evening will determine if the Planning Commission's approval is upheld or the following further evaluation and public input, the appeal is upheld. Now, what I'd like to do is ask Lisa Porras, our principal planner, to walk you through the rationale for the evaluation of the proposed subdivision and the Planning Commission's approval of the proposal. And we also have Jeff Baird of Baird and Driscoll, our consultant on the housing element, and they'll be available to answer questions.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Lisa Porras, principal planner for the city of San Carlos. Actually, so let's move on to the next slide here. This slide here depicts the proposed lot split at the subject site. And I'd just like to take a minute to kind of walk you through it to orient you about the proposed request. So this graphic here is depicting the actual lot. It also shows existing site conditions, I guess in a fuchsia colored color. You can see the outline of the existing house. It shows existing curb cuts, the driveway, some site landscaping, and in addition to that, it is also showing the proposed lot split, and it is a green dash line. I don't have a pointer, but it's kind of right down the center of the two lots, which would create one new corner lot of a size of about 6,022 square feet, and then one interior lot of a size 5,015 square feet. And it also shows the future or the potential future development envelope of two new proposed homes that would eventually, if this lot split is approved, be developed. And the development envelope represents the front yard, interior, and street side, as well as rear setback areas. So I know there's a lot going on that one graphic, but I just wanted to point that out to you, that there are many different layers being shown. Again, existing conditions and then future lot split and potential development envelope of the two new future homes. This item was heard on September 15th last year and was presented before the Planning Commission and was actually approved, but approved with a 3-2 vote. Some of the concerns that were expressed that night included concerns focused on traffic and visibility as a result of two new homes that would eventually be built on the two lots. Concerns were also centering around removal of trees, some potential protected, significant, or heritage trees on the site, as well as the design of new homes. Some of the folks that attended the meeting that night were concerned about the size of homes that would eventually be built on the two parcels if they were to be split. And then other concerns related to kind of the pattern of the lots and the size of the lots and how they compare to existing lots along Eaton Avenue and along some of the nearby blocks, as well as concerns that the lot split would result in two new homes that would be built inconsistent with the maximum density requirements of the RS6 zoning standards. So following that approval on the 15th, 10 days later, staff received an application for an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision. There were a total of about 19 different appellants who signed and showed support for the appeal. And in your packet, there should be a letter outlining all of the different reasons for the appeal. And I will go over these just briefly. But the basis of the appeal was that the overall lot split didn't comply with the purpose of the RS6 zoning district. Again, there were some more discussion about traffic and visibility issues, tree removal. There were even some noted violations that the applicant was involved with in the county of San Mateo, and concerns that signatures from both of the property owners were not actually on the application, that the public notice wasn't actually done correctly, and then again, consistency with additional lots in the nearby neighborhood, as well as with the maximum density requirements of the RS6 district. So in the staff report, as you can see, staff has prepared some analyses and responses to each of these concerns and have documented these within the staff report. The staff report does demonstrate that the lot split complies with the minimum lot size requirements of the RS6 zoning district, and we also demonstrated that each of the homes, if this lot split were to be approved, that they would be consistent with the maximum density requirements, and we even provided a calculation on how we arrived at the density consistency issue. This next slide here is actually not to scale, it's a little bit skewed, but the purpose of the slide is to really illustrate that there are other lots in the vicinity and even corner lots as well that are just above 5,000 square feet. And so basically what this slide is showing is a subject site kind of in the center there at 1360 Eaton Avenue, the corner lot being just over 6,000 square feet, and again the interior lot just over 5, and then over to the towards Laurel Street along Eaton Avenue, there are two lots, existing lots with homes on them that are, one is just under 5,000 square feet and one is 5,600, and then there is another lot over on the corner of Sunnydale and Elm Street that's 5,500 square feet. There are actually additional lot sizes that are similar. We didn't highlight each and every one because the slide would actually get a little bit crowded there. So based on the foregoing, staff is recommending that the City Council deny the appeal of Walter Alvarado and the 18 other named appellants, and thereby uphold the Planning Commission's approval of a tentative parcel map for a lot split at 1360 Eaton Avenue. Both myself, the Associate Planner Jill Lewis, who processed this application and presented it before the Planning Commission, is here tonight, as well as Al Savay, and we are all available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Questions of staff? Start with Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. It was brought up in the appellant's comments, I think, that what if if someone came to you and said, I have an acre parcel and I want to have a lot split, and it's about 43,000 and change, and I want to divide it into 8 parcels. So now each of my parcels is about 5,000 and change. Would that be appropriate to do?
Yes, it would be, provided the minimum lot size of each of those parcels is consistent with the minimum lot size requirements of the base zoning district. And in this particular case, for the RS6 zoning district, the minimum lot size for an interior parcel is 5,000 square feet. But if you're creating a parcel that's on the corner where there's 2 street frontages, it's required to be a little bit larger at 6,000 square feet. Okay. So that would subdividing 1 acre into 8 individual acre lots would be consistent with the minimum lot size requirements.
Okay, so if I did that and then I just went away for 5 or 10 years and I came back and then I said, okay, now I want to build 8 houses. Is there a problem there?
No, there wouldn't be. That's the minimum lot size, and the use that is permitted by right is 1 single family detached home.
But yet the zoning is RS6. Let's say in my area, that this 1 acre parcel sits. Isn't that sort of fighting against each other?
Actually, in both cases, they're correct. So if you had 1 acre and you did nothing to it and you wanted to find out what the maximum number of units that you could build on the site, the density requirement is 6 units per acre. So based upon that 1 acre, that 1 contiguous lot, you could, in theory, build the 6 units. However, in addition, and in both cases are actually correct, if you wanted to subdivide it into 5,000 square foot lots and say you have 8 lots, you're now having potential for 8 new units to be built on each one of those 8 lots. That would also be consistent with the requirements. And I believe what was stated in the letter provided by the appellant was how those two were congruent. And they're not necessarily incongruent, they're just 2 different applications of the same maximum density standard. In that particular case, I believe the thought was, well, how could you end up with 8, when originally you start with 6?
It certainly does seem a little, to the average person, certainly it would not, doesn't register. Okay, I just want to ask the question. So let's assume that this lot split was occurred in this location at 1360. How big could these houses be?
The size of the homes are based on the setback requirements, and they're also based upon the building height. And and also, I would say that the setback requirements, there are different setback requirements for the first story, and then different greater setback requirements for the second story. There is a lot coverage maximum that also would govern the size of the home, but other than that, there is no maximum size of a home. If you have a lot that allows you to build a home of a certain size and you're meeting your setback requirements, you're meeting your lot coverage, you're providing the right amount of landscaping, and you're within the maximum height limitations, that's the house that you can build.
I get all that. I'm asking you specifically, what's the biggest house you can build on these 2 houses?
I don't know them. Staff hasn't run through a scenario kind of figuring out which, we can look at what the footprint would be. So it's 50% of the lot. Maybe, Jill, if you don't mind running a few calculations, but if you can have 50% of the lot can have a building footprint on it. Okay. So if you're looking at a 5,000 square foot lot, you could potentially have a building footprint of 2,500 square feet. And then if you decided to do a second story, you'd probably have, somewhat less than that.
So it wouldn't be a 5,000 square foot house, but it could possibly be 3,500 square foot house, possibly?
Possibly. That seems reasonable.
It could be that, in that, like you said, it has to be set back and all the different things. I'm just trying to identify the size of, because there's a lot of big houses in town, and a lot of big houses are being built. So I'm just trying to identify. So on the 6,000 foot lot, if you have a 3,000 square foot footprint, then you theoretically could build you might build a 5,000 square, you could theoretically build a 5,000 square foot house?
You might be able to fit that on a 6,000 square foot lot.
Okay. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm not trying to force this. I'm just asking the question. Okay. Those are actually the only 2 questions I had, but I'm sorry, sure.
Just to answer the question.
Oh, okay.
When you look at what the footprint is and then apply the setbacks for the second story, generally you take whatever the footprint is allowable per coverage at the ground floor, and then you apply the setbacks, you reduce that number by about 20%.
Okay, so theoretically, if it's a 3,000 foot thing, 6,000 foot lot, 3,000 footprint, you could theoretically have a 5,400 foot on the second. Okay, all right, thanks. I appreciate it. That's all I had at this time. Thank you.
Slowly catching up to my speaker lights. Apologize, Mark. You are next.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions to start with. And this, I'm going to ask it of you, Lisa, but this may be a Greg question. I'd like to understand, with this matter being before us, what discretion do we have? What are the legal standards that we need to uphold? I mean, I presume we can't just arbitrarily say, conclude one thing or another. It must be based on something.
I think I'll respond to the question, Council Member. The standards for in the municipal code will govern the discretion that you have, and this code section is under subdivisions, Chapter 1724.110. Generally, there are a series of findings that you see in the resolution that's attached to your staff report. All those findings need to be made in the affirmative to approve the subdivision. So the staff has endeavored to, based upon the facts, support each one of those findings based upon the facts presented in the staff report and information that they've provided and information that was provided at the Planning Commission level. Tonight, you're hearing the action just as if you were the Planning Commission. It's a de novo review. You're not bound by what the Planning Commission decided, but you are bound by the standards in the municipal code. There's an option in the code that you disapprove. You can disapprove the map if you can't make all of the findings. There is a way to attach conditions. However, those conditions need to be attached to the findings. So for example, hypothetically, if there was one of the findings that you couldn't make, but you could make that finding if there was a condition attached to it, you can do that. But you have to factually attach or provide a nexus between your concerns and your inability to make the findings, and then with that condition, you can make the findings based upon that factual discussion. If I'm clear on that.
Yes, this is reminding me a little bit of the discussion we had surrounding the Transit Village EIR, and as I recall, the practical process that would have been followed, for example, had the council chosen to reject the staff recommendation, would have been not so much to make alternative findings at this meeting, but to do the rejection, and then staff would be tasked with further discussions to figure out how to codify that, or indeed, if in fact it could be codified.
And that would, if we get to that point, that's probably what I'd recommend, because you don't have that, if the recommendation of staff is not followed, we don't have a resolution that has developed the findings that could not be made.
Okay. Lisa, thank you, Greg. Lisa, my second question is, can you briefly outline, and I apologize for not having time to go back and listen to the Planning Commission recording directly, but can you briefly outline for me what the gist of the 3-2 vote was? Obviously, the Planning Commission was split on whether or not to approve the subdivision.
Sure. I would say that I'll give you two answers, because there were obviously two votes. For one of the commissioners, I believe the concern centered on the fact that it was difficult to be able to make a positive recommendation on the lot split, because the details of a future home, where it would be sited on the lot, would trees be removed, how would it impact visibility, was not part of the application. While sometimes applicants will propose design review perhaps in conjunction with the lot split, so you can kind of see how everything would play out, this application was not submitted in that manner, but it also is not required necessarily to be submitted in conjunction with one another. So that was one of the concerns expressed by one of the commissioners. The other commissioner stated that it wasn't quite clear. He couldn't really make the findings that necessarily that the proposed lot size was consistent with the overall pattern of the existing neighborhood, and there seemed to be some confusion about whether the density, the resulting density, would be consistent with the maximum permitted density for this zoning district.
Similar to that RS6 discussion you were having with Bob a few minutes ago. Last question, which may again be a Greg question. Is it possible as part of this process, if the council were not to concur with the Planning Commission decision, Greg, for us to establish additional constraints specifically on design? And I'm just being hypothetical here as an example. I mean, for example, if it turns out that, or if it appears that a certain amount of the resistance to this from the neighborhood is based on the prospect of having two very large homes built on these lots, could we, do we have the discretion to be able to say, fine, the lots can be subdivided, but it can't be a 50% lot coverage ratio, it can only be a 40% lot coverage ratio?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think it reaches you have two different code sections that are applicable. You have the subdivision ordinance that talks about the findings you need to make to approve a subdivision, but you also have the zoning code, which talks about what people are entitled to when they develop a lot. And I would recommend against trying to establish conditions of approval that are different than the underlying zoning for the area. For instance, if the zoning code allows these hypothetical sizes of homes or setbacks, attaching that to a condition could expose the city to some risk, because you would be, through a condition, possibly it could be interpreted that you're changing the zoning, and that would be the issue I'd see there.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Cameron?
Thanks, Lisa. Can you give us a sense for how frequently subdivision applications come up, over the last year, decade, et cetera?
Sure, and actually we don't have very many examples of this particular type. I would say that over the past 2 years, in the context of any kind of subdivision, has really come through to the city as part of an annexation application. I think there was one on Club Drive and then a recent one on Cranfield, whereby through the annexation we were looking at subdivision of an existing parcel, and in that particular case it was under the RS3, the lower density. But we haven't seen very many come forward, not any within the last couple of years on a pre-existing law in the RS6 zoning district.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask a little bit about trees. So the appellants raised concerns about trees potentially being removed, and I wanted to just ask a clarification question about what's in the staff report. So it said that the city or the planning staff would need to hire a certified arborist in the case that trees were going to be removed. Can you be a little bit more specific about the process?
Sure, absolutely. So within the city of San Carlos, we define a tree that needs a tree removal permit as one that is protected. And what basically protected means is classified as either a significant tree or a heritage tree, and there are certain standards in terms of sizes and tree circumference that go along with different species. So if you have a tree that meets either the definition of a heritage or significant, you need to apply for a tree removal permit with planning. And what we do is we are in contract with a licensed arborist who will go out and verify the species and size of the tree, and also evaluate the tree based upon its conditions, it's the health of the tree, and also contextually in terms of if there's any kind of damage that is being done by the tree to the surrounding environment or structure. And then they provide a report back to staff. We evaluate it, and we need to make findings. There are certain findings that need to be met before we can issue the removal of a tree.
And so it's the responsibility of the property owner to apply for that permit?
That is correct.
So I did talk to one of the appellants by phone today, and she mentioned that there had been another property in the neighborhood that had recently been sold and that a heritage tree had been removed without a permit. Are you familiar with that situation?
Well, in terms of that situation, and now it could be that situation can very well happen, and maybe it does inadvertently often, because maybe people don't realize you need a permit to remove a tree. But within the city ordinance, the only time we know about that, it's really done through code enforcement, where somebody in the community may inform us that, their call is just wanting to make sure that somebody received a tree removal permit. And if there is no permit that had been issued, it becomes a matter of code enforcement. We reach out to that property owner and we let them know about the city's tree ordinance, and then we take steps to correct the issue. I mean, we have a 1-to-1 replacement requirement that's typically invoked for every tree removal.
I see. And so is that something that frequently comes up, or I mean, so do we find the property owner, or we just ask them to plant a new tree, or sort of how does that work, and how frequently does it actually occur? Because I think the question was, yeah, it's all very well and good to say someone's required to have a permit and that they shouldn't remove a tree, but they cited an example where, hey, a tree had been removed and nothing was done about it. So I just wanted to get some more information.
Yeah, we don't know about those cases unless we're informed, and then we can follow up and take action and find out, was that tree actually, did it meet the definition of a protected tree? Should it have received a permit? And then if need be, and if it is a protected tree, then we require that they apply for a tree removal permit post removal, and that involves paying double the fees, perhaps a violation. There is language in the code that allows us to collect fees that are in place when someone unintentionally violates the tree removal permit, and we can require tree of a certain size to be planted in a certain location, and that's our best way to remedy the situation. But we do often rely on members of our community to let us know if they believe that there may be a tree that was removed without a permit.
Okay, I appreciate the information. I guess reading between the lines, it sounds like maybe this is something that doesn't occur that frequently. Is that a good guess? Or
I would say since I've been here, it's been about 2 years now, there may have been 3 cases where that might have been the case that happened.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Matt?
So I have a few questions here. Currently, the site address is on Eaton, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so when they're split, will the corner lot still be Eaton, or will it be something other? Would it be the other street? Do we know? Home Street?
Yeah, it would be, I believe the front of the lot is basically the side that has the smaller amount of width. And Jill, did we determine what the front of the lot would be on that corner lot? I don't know if it was measured out to be facing Eaton Avenue or Elm Street on the side. I'll get back to you on that.
That's
if you
something
can
I'm
recall.
also struggling with, because I can't tell from anything you provided us. You've given us lot square footage, but not lot dimensions, and that was going to be one of my questions. So while Jill's working on that, perhaps you could give some of the, I understand it's not a rectangle because of Eaton is curving along there a little bit, plus it's at an angle relative to what's currently a side property line, it looks like. But I was curious, what are some of the lot dimensions, especially the ones that are straight up?
Yeah, hopefully we do have the original or the full-size plan sheet where we can look at those. I'm sorry that they're not very legible on the diagram you have in front of you.
What I'm looking for is, what's this dimension here?
Mm-hmm.
What's this dimension along here?
Okay.
For the two properties.
Okay, we'll get that information for you.
And while they're working on that, I guess this would be a question perhaps for the city attorney. Staff has already mentioned that there was not even some type of preliminary development plan submitted with this. So they're just looking right now at splitting the lot. And I'm troubled by that because we also have, in addition to setback requirements and height limits and so forth, we have design guidelines or design, I guess they're guidelines. I don't know how strict we are with them necessarily, but things like, you shouldn't look at the front of a house and see nothing but garage, for instance. That you have to have so much of a setback for the porch. You have to have a front-facing entrance. And if you look at all these guideline requirements, when you start splitting up these properties, the question is, what does that form begin to look like, and how doable is it? And yet we have got nothing here to look at to tell us what's being considered. So on that basis alone, can we reject this?
Well, the short answer to that is we do not require applicants to bring that kind of information for a lot split. So I'm going to direct you to the findings. If there's one of the findings, there's about 8 of them, and they're to find them. You'll look at the resolution which lays out all the findings, and if you in looking at those findings, you can't make any one of them, then you would be allowed to vote against the project and
On any one of them.
any one of them.
Right.
Okay, so through the mayor, staff was able to look at the lot plan, and what I'd like to do is maybe I can walk this over to Councilmember Grocott and show him what the dimensions are, and he can pass it down the row. But essentially, for the 2 new lots, the interior lot frontage, the proposed parcel B, Sure. Let's see. Oh, the lot. Here we go. Right. Okay, so we're looking, it's shown here as actually, no, it does show the 2 lots. So looking at the interior lot, again, the one in the middle there, proposed parcel B, it has a proposed lot front width of just over 54 feet, and the parcel to the left of it, parcel A, that's 72 feet. And along the far right property line for the interior lot, that is about 98 feet long. And then on the other side, the property line that's facing Elm Street, that one is would be 78 feet. So in terms of what would be considered the front of that corner lot, it's basically the shorter of the 2 dimensions. So because it's 72, less than 78, the frontage of the corner lot will be off of Eaton Avenue. And if it's helpful, I'd be happy to pass this to the council members if they'd like to take a closer look.
So then, just one more dimension then, the back of parcel A, the interior, is also 54 feet.
No, actually, 54 feet is parcel B, the interior
Parcel B,
lot.
okay,
Yeah.
but it's 54 front and back.
It's 54, it's just under 54, it's a little bit narrower
Yeah,
at the
because
end
not
there.
at an angle.
No.
So it's straight, so it's a little
Pretty
less than
straight.
54, but
Correct,
okay.
yeah.
And then down the other side, it must be just a little less than 98.
It's actually 71.
71?
71.
No, 98 on the right. So on the
Oh,
left
on the
side.
right,
So on the left side, what is it?
Oh, on the left side, it's 89.
89.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to see. There's a lot on here, but it's 89.
This one's 72, really. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Bob and then Mark.
Lisa, going back to Mr. Johnson's question on the tree, let's assume that it's apparently a very large tree, looks like, is on the property. Let's just say you know, let's say it was another piece of property somewhere else, and there was that very large tree on there, and somehow it got taken out. And the reason probably is because the person wanted to build a certain kind of house. So you indicated, you know, double fees and plant a tree and whatever. Would that be grounds for saying that's all well and good, but you're not going to be building the house, you're not going to be building the big house you think you are because you took the tree down?
Well, what we would do with this application, and I didn't mention it before, when someone is proposing a new home in conjunction with the tree removal, we do not issue the tree removal first. We kind of like to take a look at the whole thing. And for all new homes, they're subject to review by the city's Residential Design Review Committee, the RDRC, and they would evaluate the project in total. And it could be that the RDRC makes a decision, you know, to save the tree or to protect the tree and require some sort of different design in order to preserve an otherwise healthy tree. The RDRC could
And I
make
understand
finding.
that completely. That's not quite what I asked. So what I asked is if the tree magically disappears, okay, somehow, without RDC or all those alphabet soup stuff, what happens? Does that individual, is it a pass? You get to just put a little tree in there and it's going to grow? Or you just assume now that that tree is there and therefore it goes to the residential RDRC?
So I think what you're saying is, what if a tree was removed without a permit and it was required to have a permit and it's just gone? And now we're looking at someone's development application to construct a new home. So what do we do? In this case, you know, if we know about the tree permit violation, we can take steps to require a replacement. We could condition the project to have a larger size tree be planted. It could be something that the RDRC, you know, understands, and maybe they want to address maybe 2-for-1 replacement. So we would look at it, you know, the issue of an otherwise healthy protected tree that was removed that's no longer there in conjunction with the new, with the application to construct a new home.
There's no free pass, is my point. There's no, oh gosh, it's gone, but, you know, let me build my house.
No, we would address it.
Okay, I'm just asking the question because I'm just trying to understand.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to refresh my memory. There actually, as I recall, we had a not dissimilar situation on White Oak Way not too long ago where there was a white oak, a rather large white oak that I think was removed as part of a new home construction or substantial remodeling project. I actually don't recall offhand the status of white oaks, but as I recall, they're pretty high up there in our hierarchy of trees that we're trying to preserve. And so in that instance, it obviously wasn't preserved. So I would take it from that whatever this tree is, our tree ordinance is not such that we can simply say you have to design around it. That may be more a question for Greg than Lisa, but I'd just like to get some clarity on that. Sort of a follow-on to what Bob was talking about, I think.
Well, for a tree that's healthy, we have the discretion to deny a tree removal. The ordinance is designed to preserve heritage or significant trees. The issue that I think comes up from time to time is we have a tree that is in marginal health or might be considered dangerous through the city arborist's expert opinion. Those trees, sometimes they're not readily apparent that there's a problem with them. White oak trees do sometimes have rot that's in the center that can be identified by an expert, or they're out of balance, or those types of issues come up that would all be evaluated as part of an application or a request for a permit to remove a tree. But an otherwise healthy tree, we have the discretion to say no, and the RDRC has the discretion to provide for that tree so that the tree would not be removed, and looking at the aesthetics of the entire project and the lot justify that the tree needs to be preserved.
And Greg, is that a function of the type of tree, or does that generally apply to any significant tree that's more than a certain size?
I think there's some protected species, and then historic trees also have some protection.
And And refresh my memory, Lisa, what type of tree is the one that's on the property, the large one? Is it what, actually, I don't need to know the exact type. Is it one of those protected glass trees?
I believe it is. What is the species listed on the tree? Redwood. It's a redwood. I think there's several. Several redwoods, a valley oak.
All of which I take it are protected.
Yes, if they meet the certain size requirements, and I believe they do.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, Matt, you had another question?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about trees, and again, we don't have anything that, you know, I didn't actually walk this site or anything, get the chance to do that, so I don't know where these trees are.
I'd be happy to provide the council with a hard copy. So you can kind of take a look at where they're at, but I'll just, for the benefit of the audience, there are 3 redwood trees in the lower left-hand corner of the new corner lot, the 6,000 square foot lot. And then there are also several trees in the lower right-hand corner of parcel B. And there's 3 redwoods, and then there's a valley oak, somewhat kind of in the higher center portion of the right property line of proposed parcel B.
Okay. You just want to see that?
Like 7 trees.
No, I got it.
You got it. Okay.
All right. Lisa, I just have a couple.
Sure.
I think Mark asked what discretion we have. I guess it's a very simple question, and it seems that he has, but I wanted to ask it anyway. According to staff, has the applicant met all the requirements to complete this project?
Yes, they have. For the lot split, yes. For the application that's in front of the council, yes.
All right. And then the other one is it too early in the process, or do we know which trees are going to be removed, as he indicated, or is that something that comes later?
Well, that would come later. Let me move back here to that one graphic that has a lot of layers on it. Right here, it's the dashed line that's kind of in the center of each lot, is depicting where the required setbacks are located for the front, side, and rear.
Okay.
So, you know, as you can see for proposed parcel A, the corner lot, that development envelope doesn't seem to impact the 3 redwood trees in the lower left corner.
Okay.
But however, on proposed parcel B, it looks like potentially it could. But again, this is just, you know, the applicant could, I suppose, maybe through architecture and building articulation, work around it. But another, you know, you could also assume that these trees may be requested to be removed as part of a future application if the applicant chose to build out to the setback areas.
All right. So really that comes at some point in the process.
That would come up during the design review application and then the under the review of the RDRC.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Any other questions of staff?
Yeah.
Okay. Matt?
When you're pointing out these setback requirements, that's for ground floor living space, but if it's a garage, isn't it, it's 20 feet from the back of the sidewalk, isn't it?
That's correct. The garage is required to be set back 20 feet from the property line.
So these lines would, for the garage portion, would have to jog back a little bit from what the applicant has shown here is 15.
I would like to clarify, I don't know if it's 15 or if they incorporated the 20-foot garage setback within these lines. Maybe that's something we can ask
Looks like
the applicant.
15, but anyways.
Yeah,
okay.
we can ask for clarification on that. It is 15, so
Yeah,
it
looks like it.
would be required to go back an additional 5 feet
Yeah,
to allow
wherever
for
they
the
put
garage. Correct, yeah.
Okay. Last question, promise. When you were showing us those density things, I noticed you're rounding up. And I don't know that the code addresses this, but I guess the assumption is as long as you make that 0.5, you round up.
That's correct. And
That's
that's
right.
defined in the zoning ordinance.
defined in the
Yeah,
zoning.
under
Okay.
the rules of measurement section.
Great. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, now, since this is a public hearing, we do have some speaker slips. First up is Nicole Bergeron, followed by Hillary Chirichi. Did I get it right? Amazing. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, nice to see you all. Happy New Year. My husband Ted Lambert and I live at 1377 Eaton, which is right across the street from 1360. We're right where Elm tees. I think half the city runs by our house. I wanted to comment first that I feel like this tentative parcel map is not itself particularly transparent for residents trying to understand what's happening. There's way too many layers on this, and this trying to figure out what houses might someday get built there. We've had no communication with the neighbors or the builder, and I don't know if you guys know this, it costs $2,000 to appeal this, which really, frankly, surprised me as a citizen, that's how much it cost just to try to find out more information and come before you guys on the appeal. The tree issue, I will say the house, I don't know the street number, that's on the other corner of Elm. There was a massive heritage tree that was brought down by the developer when he flipped the house the crack of dawn on a Saturday morning. There was no one in the city to call to say this was happening, and now that tree's gone. So there's actually some concern that's actually based on track record of not having the city do this preventive work, which sounds good in theory, but we're not super confident about it. I also wanted to mention to folks that the development of South Laurel is impacting us in terms of cars and traffic, people coming to the restaurants, parking while they're there, or coming down Eaton to get to them. And that I hope that the council will consider the sight lines and the added parking. Right now, that house has a circular drive. All the cars can park on the property. You add two houses that are squeezed on there. Most of the cars are going to get bumped onto the streets, and that's already a crowded area. So I think those are my main concerns at this point. Not super happy with the process. So that's it. Thanks. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nicole. Hillary?
So I'm Hillary Chirichi. I'm Nicole's neighbor. I'm at 1375 Eaton Avenue. And my husband and I, and now our two kids, have been there for around 15 years. I think that, I sort of share all of Nicole's concerns. I think in particular the lack of transparency is very disconcerting. The Planning Commission, various members talked about the close scrutiny that's been given by the community to different levels of this, and there's been absolutely no scrutiny. In fact, we were never even informed of it. We found it out through sort of various neighbor activism. I think that, apparently there's a lot of information that's contained in the staff report. There were over a half a dozen issues that were listed in this $2,000 appeal, and all we've heard discussion of is, the very specific sort of square footage, zoning, and the trees, both of which are obviously concerns of us, but there's over half a dozen issues in there. So I think in order to get any level of comfort, we would like all of those issues very clearly and specifically addressed. And then, as Nicole said, we have, very sort of direct experience with trees being removed at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning with no recourse for the neighbors. So it's not an after the fact. It's a what do we do now to prevent these types of things from happening in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Hillary. Next is Walter Alvarado.
My name is Walter Alvarado. I live at 1348 Eaton Avenue. It's my daughter, Stephanie. I didn't want to interrupt staff when you were asking about dimensions, but I drew up something to help you. This is going to be the small interior lot. And so you can see the 54 width, which was consistent with staff, 97.87, so rounding up to 98, I think was fair. This side is going to be small. You got that number. But what I wanted to point out is here's a photograph from the street of the 3 redwoods. So if you look at the top, you can see my house, which you can estimate how tall that second-story house is, and see how this set of 3 redwoods just dominate the landscape, maybe 60, 80 feet tall. And those 3 trees are represented here, here, and here, 17 feet from the border with my property, and 17 feet from the street is where that tree is. So that's going to leave 37 feet to the other side if you're just counting where the trunk is and disregarding the canopy of this tree. So I'm wondering, how in the world can you fit a house on this property? The second issue, here's the Valley Oak. It's 67 feet, but right up against the fence line. It extends 13 feet and well over my second-story house on my side of the property. 19 feet it extends away from the street, and about 20 feet toward the street. I did not go on my neighbor's property. I can only estimate, but I did get a photograph from the neighbor on the other side who faces Elm, and it looked like the tree extended, almost 30 feet or maybe even more. But even if it's trimmed to be even with this one, we're talking about 13 feet into this property. And again, how are you going to fit a house on this parcel if you make it that small? That would be anything reasonable that would fit in the neighborhood. So there have been talk about trees. And I appreciate the concern the City Council appears to give to this issue. Right here I have a copy of a complaint for injunctive relief filed by the City of San Mateo, which in response to that issue, it simply said it wasn't relevant. So if you just read the staff report, you would not know what this irrelevant issue supposedly is. And among the allegations was that Mr. Sewell, who was constructing a single-family dwelling in San Mateo, California, did not seek a permit authorizing the removal of trees then existing on the property and classified as heritage trees. Okay, and then it goes on to explain how they're accusing him of removing these heritage trees without a permit. The stipulated judgment has him being fined $20,000 for the removal of these trees. So I think that the concern that heritage trees will be removed without a permit to somehow allow for subsequent building of a much larger home is a real concern. Additionally, after the initial complaint was filed, a building division of community development department, that's an employee, he's a senior building inspector, Mr. Rigoberto Caro, there's a declaration filed by him in which he explains that he was denied access to this property that Mr. Sewell was developing on 2 occasions.
Mr. Alvarado, if you could wrap it up, please. We've gone way over your time, so if you could wrap it up, please.
I think it's really important to address this concern, and I just want to say that Mr. Rubens could support this. My first item was that Municipal Code 18.04.01A talks about preserving, protecting, or enhancing the character of the neighborhood. And this will do neither of those. So that would be the finding that I think that the City Council could make to approve this appeal and deny the subdivision of the lot. Additionally, I gave staff a copy of a affidavit of the trust showing that it needed both trustees to sign the any document to bind the trust. And the application clearly only has the purported signature of one of the trustees, not both. So that initial application wasn't even completed.
All right. Thank you. Next up is Clarice Caponari.
Happy New Year, Council.
How are you, Clarice? Good. Nice to see you.
See you. I agree completely with Walter, and I'm here to express my outrage at the raising of this home to subdivide it into two properties which are highly questionable right now. We have seen no guidelines. We know that Mr. Soul has multiple violations in previous situations similar to this. And so without going into the traffic study, the tree removal, I've heard a lot about codes. This code doesn't meet this, or this code meets this. I think what we really need to concern ourselves with is to preserve and to protect our neighborhoods and our families who live there. And I think that should be the first consideration of this council. Therefore, I would like to strongly recommend the council reject the raising and the development of these two monoliths that could be potentially constructed on that property. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I think that's all the speaker slips we have. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Come on up. You can fill out a speaker slip when you're done. Sorry, didn't miss you. I didn't see you. Okay.
So I'm a mother in the neighborhood, and I actually live on Sunnydale. So I'm on the other end. But as a person that does carpools with the kids throughout the neighborhood, I have to tell you that I can't even pull over to the side and pick up kids on Walnut or Eaton that are literally 5 houses away from my house in Sunnydale. And then another 5 houses away, I go on to Eaton, and I have to double park. The kids are literally, it's a crammed street. And that's before this house, these 2 houses would even be built, that don't even use the street right now to park. So that's one thing. The other component too, and I hate to be redundant, but I really do want to emphasize this, given that I'm on a small subsection of Sunnydale, along with a few faces I recognize here. We are tremendously impacted by the 3 new restaurants that are in the area, and they are consistently parking all the way onto my street. And in fact, I can't even put my garbage cans out on Friday mornings because they sometimes leave their cars overnight. They go to the office. I'm happy that they take a cab home. But our street is tremendously impacted. In addition to the kids that I'm picking up on Friday morning for that carpool, they park on Walnut. And those residents can't even park in front of their house. They actually try to block their front of their own house so that their husband can get home that night and park. So it is a very congested radius there, and I just feel that dividing this, and if they had anybody visit their home, where are those people going to park, right? So it's not just the person that lives there. God forbid they invite somebody to come visit them. I have no idea where they're going to find parking. So I just encourage you, the trees are huge that are on this property. I walk the block with my dogs consistently, and I have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to preserve those trees and the beauty of our neighborhood by doing this. So I hope you consider this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. You just fill out a speaker slip. I think it's back on the back counter. And just hand it to the clerk. All right, I think we had one more speaker. Come on up. You could just give us your name. I forgot to ask the previous speaker, but not required, but if you'd like to.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I am Walter's daughter. I know I am not a homeowner, so I don't have necessarily the same sway, but I live right next door to this plot. I have for the last 12 years. I think everything that people have already said is really important, traffic being one of them. I can't tell you, slowly pulling out of my car, how many times I can't see, and I've almost been hit by a car. The other thing I'd like to point out is that of the 5 who ruled on this before, the 2 that voted no or against building these 2 lots did walk in the neighborhood and look at the plot. The other 3 did not, and I think that's an important piece of information to have. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Would anyone else like to speak? Make sure I look at everybody. All right. Yes, sir.
You entertain a motion to close the public hearing. I just wanted to make sure you announced that this was when the applicant of the project could speak if they so chose.
All right. Is the applicant here?
We are.
All right. Would you like to come on up and talk?
Yes, I would. Good evening, members of the City Council. My name is Craig Sewell, and I'm representing my parents, Robert and Gloria Sewell, here tonight, who are the owners of 1360 Eaton Avenue here in San Carlos. They have resided here for the past 25 years. After my dad broke his femur bone in his right leg several years ago, my mom making numerous calls to emergency personnel to assist him in getting up after falling down. Now being resigned to a walker permanently to get around, along with my mom having an arthritic right knee where she has some difficulty walking at times, our family knew we had to do something because it was only a matter of time before something could happen due to their age and physical difficulties. Around April or so of last year, 2014, I went to the city of San Carlos to explore the possibility of changing the house around to see if I could make it more user-friendly for my parents. That is, reconfiguring it to make it where they don't have to go upstairs all the time to go to their bed and bathroom, and possibly looking to get everything down on their first floor so it would be much safer for them, so they wouldn't have to go up and down and avoid the risk of falling and causing serious injury to themselves. I first met with a nice woman by the name of Ms. Porras of the Planning Department and explained our concern and what options we had available to us, if any. Ms. Porras advised what the city of San Carlos required and what we needed to do, i.e. a survey by a licensed surveyor and so forth. After several thousands of dollars for this work, I went back to the city and showed them what we had. I was then told we need to pay more money, that is several thousand more dollars to the city for the process to begin, which we did. We then had the meeting before the Planning Commission, and then we know the results of that meeting. Gentlemen of this council, we are not asking our neighbors for anything, for none of their land to help us achieve our goals, no variances, absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, one of the appellants seated in this room tonight, by the name of Mr. Cook, who lives adjacent to my folks on the Elm Street side of the street, had come to my parents some time back to purchase some of their land to make his backyard bigger. My parents didn't sell him anything, and lo and behold, who is here joining this opposition? Mr. Cook himself. Really?
As American citizens of this great country, we are all entitled to due process with the owning of our property. We have these inalienable rights bestowed upon us by our Constitution to do what we want with our property as long as it's lawful. As the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states, no state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor to deny any person within its jurisdictions the equal protection of those laws. Members of the council, I'd like to ask you, if you go to the city and you ask them what is required, and they tell you what is required, and you do it as it is allowed by law, where's the due process? Why won't you be able to get what you seek? As the planning department submitted to you tonight, the schools will follow the law and play by all the rules set forth by the city of the council. But why are we here tonight? For very selfish reasons by all these people opposed to this project behind me. I'm sure on many occasions you've had the opportunity to drive down Eaton Avenue at one time or another. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with that corner, or somewhat. You've heard them talk about trees and the size of the houses and everything. But I believe the matter before the council tonight is this is a lot split. As Ms. Porras in the planning department will tell you, this is the process that is in place. You are part of this process here. And so if we follow the rules and do what we're told, all of us are speculating, i.e. about the trees, about monster homes. This is a lot split. We're assuming something that is not guaranteed. So with that, gentlemen, it's just very difficult to fathom that if people come before you and abide by the law and what's set forth by the city, why shall we not get what we ask for after paying? And I really like to remind you, this is a lot split. This is not a restaurant. This is not a shopping center. This is not a storage facility, but a lot split. That's it. So before we put the cart before the horse, and as Ms. Porras will explain to you and everybody from the planning department, there are mechanisms in place for the next phase, and that is if there are heritage trees on the property, which there are, there's the process that must be abided by to do that. And as the fine Mr. Alberton over there to bring up all dirt from somewhere else, I mean, this is all they have. Because if you were to go by their house, you will see that they don't park their cars like all the other neighbors on Eaton in their garages like they should, but in the driveway on the street. That's why they're opposed to this. They want to park all their cars on the street, and then they want you to think it's a dangerous area. My parents...
Sorry, Mr.
2 more seconds, sir.
Okay.
2 more
Just want you to
seconds.
wrap it up. Thank you.
My parents have a 3-car garage. They have 1 car, and they park their car in their garage. I'd like to have my mother come up and talk about this, please.
All right.
Good evening to all of you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Safe and happy and healthy New Year. As my son just pointed out, there's a lot of speculation being brought up here tonight, which they're just assuming that there's going to be 2 monster houses built on this property. Now, how can they come ahead and say this when they don't know? All as my son said, there's just a lot split now. You know, my husband, as he pointed out, about 5 years ago, fell and broke his femur bone. And from this point on, he has to walk with the walker because his equilibrium is not good anymore. And if he tries to walk without the walker, he will fall. Okay, I have issues on my knees, but talked to the surgeon and so forth, and he said to me that if I, hello? I don't know, is this working? That if I do exercise and so forth, that at this point I do not have to have any operation on my knees. Well, I'm trying to do the best that I can with my husband in his circumstances because I'm the sole care provider for my husband. Okay, we have a home that has 4 bedrooms upstairs. We have to go up the stairs. Okay, to this point, the therapist is coming out, working with my husband, and down the road he feels like, she told me this afternoon when he was there, possibly within the next 2 to 3 weeks, with my husband's health improvements, that he thinks that my husband will be able to go up the stairs. But he says, I can't guarantee anything. As far as that goes, anybody can fall. They could be 30 years old, 40 years old, 12 years old. They can have a bad accident. Something can happen. But my son is trying to prevent this. He wants to redo our home, rebuild it, put everything on the first floor so that my husband doesn't have to go upstairs because we don't have any shower downstairs. We want to have our bedroom down there. Plus the fact is our front room, it goes down one, my husband has to walk down into the family room or the front room. Okay, he wants to make everything on the one floor so that my husband is going to be as safe as can be. None of us know in the future what our health is going to be. I wish everybody, all of our neighbors who never had the decency once, none of them, to come over and ask me about the situation, what we wanted to do with the property, et cetera. But they're coming up with all these things that they know nothing about this and whatever. Did one of them?
Mrs. Sewell, thank you. You've gone way over your time, but I think we understand what you're trying to say.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. I think now.
Do you have any questions of me or?
Any council members have any questions of the applicant? Or the building owner, or the property owner? All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, I think we are at discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
All right, motion and second to close the public hearing. Is that a roll call? Or okay.
Councilmember Silly?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right. Now on to discussion. Why don't we start with Mr. Grocott?
We need a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Still learning the job. Yeah, so we do need a motion, and then we can have some discussion. Don't everybody jump at once.
I'll do it. So my motion would be to uphold the vote of the Planning Commission, the 3-2 vote. And I guess that's the appeal.
Hit the button thing.
If he hits his button, mine goes off. You know, we got all kinds of things going on here. So, and then we can, I suppose with a second and so forth, we can discuss.
I'll second that motion.
Yeah, discuss?
Now we'll have a discussion. Mr. Grocott.
Sure. Okay. Number one, I feel for everything that these people that came up and spoke, what you're feeling. You should stick around because after this, we've got the housing element, and the housing element is telling us build more. And I hate to put it this way, but I'm going to put it this way. You should have been paying attention to zoning updates, general plan updates, because I'm looking at what the city attorney said, we could deny this if we could find something in here of those conditions that we don't think applies, and there's nothing. So our hands are tied. I hear everything you're saying about trees, about traffic, about what the neighborhood's like, and so forth. But I look through those conditions, and I have to follow the law. This man's right. He went through the process. He's following the law. He has a right to his property and the use of it. There's nothing in these conditions where I can say this is incompatible with the neighborhood. You brought up the issues of traffic and trees. CEQA exempt. It's exempt from the Environmental Quality Control Act of the state of California. Hands are tied. Nothing I can do. On the other hand, just a quick comment, and then I'll stop. I went on our map application we have on our iPads, and I looked at the property from the air and then street views and all that kind of thing. And I think one of the things that is, I don't know if I'd say it's unfortunate or whatever, but it's a luxury you guys have been all living with in that neighborhood, is that if you look at the houses and you look at their house is tiny relative to the lot size. And on some of the other, especially on Walnut Street, some of the houses, at least from looking at it from the roof, like a bird flies over, there's some big houses in the neighborhood. If these people had built to, what they could have a mini hotel. Now that's unfortunate because you've all gotten used to this feeling of, boy, that's a big lot and there's all these trees and there's lots of space and everything. Well, it didn't have to be that way. It's been that way for however long this lady has owned the house, because 25 years, because that's the way she was happy to live with it. So, done.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I appreciate the comments that were made by everybody on both sides of this, or on all sides of this. I suspect there's more than just two. I just had a couple of comments that I wanted to make. First off, the applicant is correct that it's important that we follow due process, and I believe we have here. I will just remind both him and everybody else that the appeal process is part of due process. The ability of the community to complain is written into our laws deliberately, so that they have an opportunity to bring up issues that may have been missed earlier in the review cycle. There are no good answers in situations like this, but in general, we do tend to come down on the side of allowing people to enjoy their property to the extent that they can, provided it doesn't unduly impact the rest of the community. And in fact, if anything, we tend to grant quite a bit of leeway in terms of enjoyment of property. So we tend, that tends to be biased towards upholding the ability of a property owner to use their property as they see fit, which, by the way, as a principle, provides an awful lot of benefit to us as part of our society. That's why we've adopted it. I do want to make two observations before completing here. One is that, to me, part of what's going on here is something that I've heard from people in various parts of San Carlos in similar situations. I actually would love to see the council take up and review a change that it made a few years ago where it expanded the lot coverage ratios from, I think it was 40% to 50%, which basically allows larger and larger homes to be built. That's clearly in the interest of somebody who is looking to maximize the value of their property, but it's one of those things that personally I don't actually understand why. I wasn't on the council at the time. I don't know why we did that, and it's something I personally would love to see reviewed and perhaps rolled back. And then the other thing is, to the extent that there is discretion, as I think staff had indicated, on protecting the trees, the heritage trees on the site, and particularly the large trees, particularly the large heritage trees, I would very much like to encourage staff to be very diligent about that. In terms of whatever happens here and whatever development proposals come forward, I would prefer not to see a repeat of the situation that we had on White Oak Way. I don't know all the details there, but my recollection was that tree was not diseased. I could be wrong about that. But whether that one was or not, in this particular instance, if the trees are healthy, they are an important part of our community. We often say that we try to encourage trees in the community, and if we're going to encourage them, we sort of need to protect them along the way, too. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mark. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was on the Planning Commission for 6 years, and we had a few of these situations come up. The applicant is correct. The process is apparently, according to staff, followed the process to split the lots. Which is, basically, when you have a process and you have the laws, it's awfully hard There could be some situations that would come up, but I don't know that I've found any here. And just to let everyone know, I don't know about the other council members, but I did drive out there and walk around the property to get a feel for what is there. I brought up the concept of the trees, and I think the applicant is pretty aware that the neighborhood is watching the property. And I have a feeling that whatever comes up is going to be done according to all the processes and the laws that we have. I would hope they would. The other thing I would say to the folks that were appealing this is the lot line. This is step one. Mr. Grocott could probably say how many more steps there are, multiple steps that have to go through the city. At each level, there is or at each step, there is a level of review, not only by staff, but by Planning Commission and by the RCDC, looking at every house that's built in this city. And if all fails, it comes to us again, if it's appealed up. So this isn't the only bite of the apple. This isn't the only or last chance. Looking at these two parcels, and I have some experience, as Mr. Grocott does, in construction. I could see a smaller home being built on parcel B. Maybe not. Maybe the applicant will try to build a bigger home. But if those trees are heritage, he's going to be constricted, and I'm sure he realizes that. Getting back to the point, though, this is not simple, I shouldn't say that. This is a lot line adjustment to split this lot into two parts. We have to, as Mr. Grocott said, we have to go by the law, by what the items are that we're bound by. And in this case, I see no reason not to allow the lot line adjustment. And I encourage the community to be active and paying attention, obviously, to what's going to be going on here. And for each step of the way, make sure you have your input to the various committees and subcommittees and boards that will look at this proposal, assuming it goes forward and other houses are built.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Cameron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said. I want to start by thanking the neighbors for coming out. I know the reason you're here, the reason you spent the time, the reason you paid the $2,000, which I agree seems exorbitant for an appeal, is because you love your neighborhood, because you care about your neighborhood. You've invested your life in that neighborhood. You've raised your kids in that neighborhood. And in many ways, you collectively own that neighborhood. And I guess, what I would say to Mr. Sewell is changes that you make to your property, even though you may have the legal right to do so, have a real impact on your neighbors. It's meaningful for them. They care. They're taking their time to come here. And I would encourage you to potentially try and work to repair what seems to be a pretty frayed relationship here. And in a spirit of neighborliness, share your plans with them. Be transparent as you can to the best of your ability. I think the other thing that I would say is that a lot of the things that I've heard tonight, some of them are specific to this piece of property. Others are more symbolic issues that have to do with a lot of changes that are going on in San Carlos. I know there's a lot of speeding on Eaton Avenue as we add more cars and as people want to get down to South Laurel. I know there's parking issues as we've added some great new restaurants. And those, I think, I want the members of the public here to know that I'm committed to working on them independent of this specific project. I think the last thing I would say is I think the applicants have made a compelling case that in their concerns about things that may potentially happen. And I do think the case is compelling. I am concerned about the removal of trees. Unfortunately, in the position that I sit, I'm not able to make the determination on speculation. I don't know what's going to have to happen. I can only say whether or not under the current rules the applicant has satisfied them. And based on the discussion here tonight, I think that he has. And so therefore, under that definition, people have the right to do what they want with their properties as long as it follows the law. I would say, however, I hope if you want to do anything with those trees, you do get a permit. I personally will do everything in my power to make sure that that you follow the process there. And I think it's something that these types of things don't come up that often. It's very meaningful to the broader community, and so I hope that you share more broadly with your neighbors what your plans are, and that you follow the process all the way through.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you all. Good, thoughtful comments. I would only add, I live about 4 blocks away, so I'll be watching. I know that lot. I just 2 things, and not to be redundant, but I hope the neighbors understand our limitations as a council, what we can and cannot do, even though we might not want to see this happen. It's not really within our power to stop it. If an applicant follows all the rules and procedures, and this applicant has. And the only thing I would say to you, Mr. Sewell, is be a good neighbor and engage your neighbors and listen to them and engage them and try to work with them as you take your project forward. All right. I apologize. Matt, you had one more thing you wanted to add?
Yeah, just quickly as quickly as I can. Somebody had mentioned about the $2,000 fee. We're the ones that actually set that, and one of the reasons it's done that way is so that you get this kind of thing, where you don't get one person coming and appealing, but it's a neighborhood. Because if you divide that $2,000 by a number of applicants, it shouldn't work out to be that too much, to be too onerous. But I understand it can appear to be onerous. I just wanted to hit on a couple other things, since, to look at this as a discussion and not us just, giving our little sermons here. But Mr. Olbert had mentioned about the trees. I was kind of looking for the same thing when I was looking through the conditions. And every time I looked at a condition that I thought might apply to the trees, CEQA exempt or, whatever, the staff report says you can't use that one. And so my comment to the staff is, and we have seen this before. Everybody says, oh, we don't see this very often. No, we don't see it very often. But when we see it, we see developers taking a piece of property in the dark of night and tearing down trees and then just paying the fine. And I think we need something in our tree ordinance that puts more teeth into that even if it said, you do that, you're not going anywhere. You're not going to the next step in the process if trees disappear during the middle of the night. And, I heard somebody say the other day about in towns like Atherton and Woodside, that's exactly what happens. They just look at it, okay, $100,000, fine, because they've got the money. So there's no teeth in the law. I think, need to look at that at some point. And then the other thing Mr. Olbert said that I agree with is the rollback on the 50%. I think we should bring that back to the dais at some point and take another look at that.
Well, until we have the agenda discussion, there's 2 of us who want to do that.
There you go.
Mark, you had a final comment?
Yes. I just wanted to, since several of us made the comment up here, I think I may have also, we tend to use the phrase, our hands are tied in some of these situations. And while that's true, the thing I want to make sure everybody understands is you all have a vested interest in our hands being tied. It's called the rule of law. Rather than being subject to the whims of the people you've elected, you can take confidence in the fact that they too have to follow the law. As a guy I once worked for, one of his favorite phrases, "The worm always turns." And today it may be useful if whims could prevail to meet your interests, but tomorrow if somebody brought something to try and stop you, you might like us not to have that ability. So just please understand that yes, our hands are tied, but they're tied for a good reason, and they're tied so that we all operate under the rule of law.
All right. Thank you. And I will just say finally, I was on the Planning Commission when we made the 40% lot coverage requirement, and I also wondered what happened to it. But times change, personnel changes. All right. I think we're probably ready. Crystal?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right, on to item 10A. And hang on a second while I read it. This is a consideration of receiving the preliminary draft 2015 to 2023 housing element and providing comments prior to the sending the document to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for review. Al?
Good evening once again, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. State law requires that every city and county in the state of California adopt a housing element as part of its general plan. And the purpose of the housing element is to ensure that local governments adequately plan to meet the housing needs of the people in the community regardless of their income. The housing element establishes programs and policies and land strategies to meet its regional housing needs allocation, and it can include ways to reduce barriers to the housing development and minimize housing development costs, among other things. So our city is currently updating its housing element for the 2015 to 23 time period, and it will guide the housing policies over the next 8 years, and it's already received a good deal of public review and stakeholder feedback, including having the Planning Commission take a look at this. And tonight, what we're asking is to have you take a look at it, give us any direction that you might have or any guidance, or tell us if you think there's something that we missed before we send it up to the state. And so what I'm going to do now is introduce Lisa Porras, and she'll discuss the draft, administrative draft, in more detail.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening again. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into the heart of the draft document. Now, in terms of the housing element, a large part of the update centers on what you actually have to include in the housing element document itself. The state requires that we include 6 primary components within a housing element. The first one you will see in its evaluation of the previous housing element, and this is a housing element that was adopted back in 2009 as part of the general plan update. It also involves a review of the plan's programs and objectives, and looks at how well the city did in accomplishing some of the programs and actions it outlined for itself back in 2009. The second part of the housing element update is that we take a look at what is called the housing needs assessment. And this focuses in on the city's existing housing needs as well as existing characteristics of the community. It also looks at socio-demographic information, how many households, what are the income levels of the residents within our city. And it also includes an update to the city's regional housing needs allocation, which represents the city of San Carlos's fair share of the Bay Area's projected housing growth. And I believe this council is familiar with the regional housing needs assessment for this particular housing element cycle, which is a total of 596 units. And I should say it's a minimum of 596 units over an 8-year period, or to the year 2023, that we need to plan for. In addition, we also need to do a site inventory. So we take a look at what's vacant and what we consider to be underutilized land within the entire city limits, and we update the inventory on that. That is also a very key part of the housing element update, because it allows us to take a stock to see if we can meet our regional housing needs allocation numbers. The housing element must also identify any constraints that may be existing that makes it difficult to achieve some of our objectives and build the housing units to accommodate future growth and change in the city over the planning period. We take a look at land use controls, development standards, permitting procedures, fees. All of these could be considered to be constraints in some fashion or another, as well as non-governmental constraints such as the cost of land and construction costs. That's part of the update as well. And then we have a section of the housing element that is known as quantified objectives. And basically, what quantified objectives consist of is the city's efforts and goals to look at each policy or program action item and determine approximately how many units we can construct, preserve, or rehabilitate through the life of the planning document. And then lastly, of course, because it is a policy document, it must have goals, policies, and programs or action items that the city will undertake over the next 8 years. So that summarizes the basic components of the housing element document. In terms of programs, the state does require that when we develop our programs, we need to look at 7 particular areas to focus on, and how we draft and develop and create our programs, what they need to address. The first one is that we need to have programs in place to ensure that we have adequate sites for our future housing needs. We also need to have programs or action items that provide some sort of assistance or incentives to developing an adequate supply of housing. If we have any constraints, we need to have programs and action items that can help us remove those constraints and make it easier to facilitate housing production. We also need to have programs to conserve and improve the condition of the affordable housing stock, and also preserve any affordable units that may be at risk of converting to market rate. Maybe perhaps the deed restrictions are about to expire and they could potentially convert to market rate units. So if that's the case, we need to find programs that help us preserve those particular units. We also need to ensure that we have equal housing opportunities within the city, and we promote those. And we promote those in the forms of specific actions that we will undertake to do that. And then, again, as I mentioned, we develop programs related to our quantified objectives. So all of these policies, programs, and action items are found within the preliminary draft document beginning on page 15, and that's where you will begin to see the changes shown in underline and strikeout. So as I mentioned before, our current housing element was adopted in October of 2009 along with the general plan. And as we are all familiar with, any successful policy document, if it's going to be successful, is often the result of working with stakeholders, community members, and all of those who are affected one way or another by the actual plan. And so accordingly, what we do is we reach out to stakeholders within our community, and we did that in a number of various ways. The first one is that through a process called 21 Elements, which I'm sure the council is familiar with, which basically consists of the 21 different jurisdictions within San Mateo County working together in a collaborative way. We are all under the same obligation by the state to update our housing elements, and we also have to deal with the same requirements that are set forth by the state. So it was decided years ago that the local jurisdictions would work together, and through the 21 Elements process, we've been able to meet with affordable housing providers, advocates, and stakeholders to really kind of wrap around the issues of affordable housing and what are some of the challenges that we are facing today at this time in not only providing enough housing, but providing affordable housing, which is always the biggest challenge. Specifically in the city, in our own city, we held several workshops in March and later during the year, and reached out specifically to our own constituents here, as well as anyone else, any stakeholders that would like to attend. We also took the conversation online, and we utilized the city's new Shape San Carlos platform as another mechanism to get input from the community online. Throughout the process, the city's Economic Development Advisory Commission was very much interested in the update, so we provided EDAC with several presentations so they could see how the document was shaping up to be, and also what some of the current issues we were dealing with. And then finally, as Al mentioned previously, just last week we presented the preliminary draft to the Planning Commission, which allowed the Planning Commission to review the document, provide some feedback, as well as provided an opportunity for the public to attend and provide input as well. And all of the comments that we received throughout the process are included in your packet as attachment 1, and I won't go over them in detail here, but I will mention that notably one of the more robust public comment documents that we did receive is what is called a best practices policy document that was prepared by the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County with assistance by other organizations. In response to this, I think it might be a 15 to 18 page paper outlining all the different policies that cities could undertake to address affordable housing. We felt it was necessary to respond to this paper, and in your packet is a matrix where we outline the policies that were suggested by the Housing Leadership Council and our responses to those. A lot of the policies that they've recommended we were actually able to accomplish through our existing housing element update, a large number of them being modifications that we said we would make to our zoning ordinance, which was accomplished in 2011. So I think we're in pretty good shape in terms of meeting our past goals with respect to policies and actions. In terms of overall updates to the housing element document, they're kind of in an overall framework of 8 different categories. And what we did in terms of the policies is we revised them slightly to better identify existing policies. So it was related to better issue identification of the existing policies that were in place. We also incorporated a few new policies and action items. And in addition to that, I would just like to briefly mention that one of the action items that didn't make it into the preliminary draft is provided as attachment number 3 to the packet, and that has to do with promoting home sharing as was suggested and encouraged by HIP Housing. The third type of update has to do with an update to housing conditions and trends. As I mentioned, through the needs assessment, we really need to take a look at our existing housing conditions and provide an update on that. A lot of that section will include interesting data about our socio-demographics, income levels, the age of housing stock, how many affordable housing units we currently have within the city. So it's important as part of the update to have another look at that to make sure the data is current and fresh and is reflective of our existing needs. The fourth section had to do with accomplishments of our past housing element. So that is a section of the within the preliminary draft that has been updated, and the council saw that not long ago when staff brought forward the annual housing element progress report. It's just required to be in the housing element as well. We also needed to update our section concerning the RHNA numbers, or the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Again, that's a minimum of 596 units that we need to plan for and ensure that we have the proper zoning in place and land inventory in place to accommodate those new units through the year 2023. We also took a close look of what projects were currently approved and underway. And in your staff report, you'll see that as of right now, we have about 464 new units that have either been approved or in the process of being approved. We also updated our land inventory, and then we took a look at housing production constraints. And so since the release of the preliminary draft, and again, following a meeting with the Planning Commission, there are 7 additional revisions that are presently not included in the preliminary draft, but staff is going to recommend those at this time. And again, this is based upon public input, Planning Commission direction, new state law that we became aware of, and some feedback that we're starting to hear from HCD. And we get to hear about this because we're part of the 21 Elements process, and so we get to hear from neighboring cities what some of the feedback that they are already getting from HCD, and that's because they're just a little bit ahead of San Carlos in terms of the process. So the first couple of revisions, and these are minor, but I just like to point them out, both action 1.7 and 5.5 were originally written, as you'll see in your preliminary draft, to rely on some efforts of the 21 Elements process. We received some feedback that requested that the city take another look at this language to really place the emphasis on what the city will do versus relying on 21 Elements, because the thinking was that, well, 21 Elements may not eventually undertake some of this work, so we really want to put the city, place emphasis that this is something that the city will undertake and not necessarily rely on 21 Elements, but use 21 Elements if it's available. The second item has to do with an existing action in the housing element draft, action 3.2 on page 19. Currently, this action item talks about the possibility for reducing or waiving fees to promote more infill development. One of the requested modifications to this action is to allow that only for projects that incorporate affordable housing. And we actually think that's a good suggestion. And so we would modify Action 3.2 that if we were to consider any kind of waiver or fee reductions, that those would be for projects that are proposing affordable housing within them. We also received a comment that quantified objectives, which is, how many new units would we construct, preserve, or rehabilitate, should really correspond to actual income levels. In your packet, it is shown as quantified objectives totaling to about 35% of the housing stock, whereas there's 45% of the households existing that make $100,000 or less, which is below the area median income. So the recommendation was just to increase the quantified objectives from 35 to 45 to be more in line with the actual housing income levels of the community. And then the other request was that the city identify sites for workforce housing that's located in an area that qualifies for federal, state, low-income tax credits. And basically, this would be something that the city would do as part of an action item, is we would maintain a list of sites. We would take a look at the current federal and state low-income tax credit eligibility requirements, which is sometimes located, characterized by where the sites are located, and really just provide that as a resource to those looking to see where some sites might exist. And then the other new action item would be to comply with a recent change to the state density bonus law. And basically, just to briefly summarize, the amendment to the state density bonus law requires developers to look at pre-existing affordable units that may be part of a project that they maybe want to alter or remove, and it requires that those pre-existing affordable housing units be replaced so that there's no units lost before you can even be eligible for state density bonus. So that's just an amendment, I think, that really speaks towards preserving existing affordable units. So part of the housing element would need to include an action that we comply with this new amendment to the state density bonus law. And then finally, what we're hearing from HCD is they want some policy language to ensure that employee housing, which is defined as six units or less, be treated as a single family use. So that's something that we're starting to see feedback from other jurisdictions, and so we thought we'd get ahead of it and incorporate some language in the document concerning that. And then one item, it's just so new that it's not even on the presentation, is staff recently became aware of, or at least planning staff recently became aware of other staff efforts in the city that are working towards rehabilitating 6 affordable apartment units at 817 Walnut Street. And because rehabilitation is a big part of housing element programs, we think it would be a good idea to just include that as an action item so we can take credit for the work that we're doing. So that would be an 8th item, which is to provide some language about the city's rehabilitation efforts to preserve those 6 affordable units at 817 Walnut Street. So in terms of the overall steps to achieving state certification for our housing element, this graphic here just outlines where we are in the overall process. As you can see, where the red arrow is our meeting tonight. And that's really, like Al mentioned, to provide the council and the public with an opportunity to review the preliminary draft before it starts getting reviewed by the state. The state has a checklist that they use, and they want to make sure that we are meeting their requirements, and any comments that the state has will be forwarded to staff. If there's anything substantive, we would come back to the council, but if they're minor modifications, what we would do is return to both the Planning Commission and the City Council for formal adoption proceedings. And based upon the timeline, we anticipate that we would be back before the council in April this year with a formal recommendation to actually adopt the housing element. So again, our recommendation before you tonight is to receive the preliminary draft, provide staff with any comments that you may have before we send the document to the state for review. Both myself, the director Al Savay, and our consultant Jeff Baird are here tonight to answer any questions, technical questions you may have. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Very nice. All right. Questions of staff? I see Mark, your light is on.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Lisa. Good presentation. What if we wanted to do more in the way of offering some kind of incentives to encourage more affordable housing in new construction or rehabilitative remodeling? How could we go about doing that? How could we include that in here?
Well, as you know, we currently have our below market rate housing ordinance, which requires that projects that are proposing 7 or more units, that a certain percentage be set aside as below market rate units. We have a state density bonus ordinance, which would allow us to provide as an incentive the construction of additional units depending upon the level of affordability a developer might be proposing within a project. And in conjunction with that density bonus or bonus unit, you could also get relief in the form of a concession to one of the development standards if it's preventing a developer from achieving the additional units afforded under density bonus. And maybe if our consultant could come up here, there might be some other options that we could take a look at. So are you, I guess maybe if I could ask the question, are you looking for additional ideas other than below market rate ordinance?
What got me thinking about this was very roughly speaking, and there are other constraints that would be kicked in. But my understanding from conversations with Al and Jeff and other contexts is allowing more height tends to significantly affect positively the economics of any developer, regardless of what they're building. So since providing affordable housing tends to be a drain on a project, the project economics, I was looking for a way to try and use one to help support the other. Is to say that, yes, in some areas we may have a height limit of X, but if a developer were to agree to provide more affordable housing units or perhaps a better profile of affordable housing units, that we would explicitly allow the possibility of more height. That's what I was thinking. If there are other things that we could do, I'm open to hearing those too. But that's the general thrust of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think in one way, our current BMR below market rate ordinance and the state density bonus ordinance working together would allow you to exceed the height limit if you're otherwise eligible to build additional density bonus units, and say, for example, you couldn't fit them anywhere because you'd go above the height limit. That height limit wouldn't necessarily be a constraint. You would be allowed to exceed that under state density bonus law. But in terms of other length...
I'm sorry, would that be only for the affordable units that were being built? See, because what I'm thinking of is something where the developer gets to build something bigger that with a mix of both affordable and market rate housing so that they come out ahead and we come out ahead.
We currently don't have any language regarding, that specific application whereby there's a certain percentage of affordable housing units you're allowed to exceed the height limit or maybe the maximum number of stories.
Nothing inherent, assuming the council wished to give that direction, there's nothing inherent that you know of that would keep us from doing something like that if we gave staff that direction to try and include something like that.
No, we could look at potential action language where, you're directing staff to evaluate that, and in order to accomplish that, you would have to amend the zoning ordinance and codify that in some level, but it could be something that we could address and investigate.
The other question I had was in terms of rehabilitating housing, one of the things that has concerned me for quite some time, based on my experience of living through the Northridge earthquake in Southern California, is seeing if we can find some kind of programs that incentivize retrofitting to improve the earthquake durability of multifamily housing. Because it was actually quite remarkable driving around after the Northridge earthquake. One of my takeaway lessons was in California, never live in a house, never live in an apartment or a multifamily dwelling unit where the parking is underneath the house, underneath the housing, because they all pancaked. It was rather remarkable. And I understand that San Francisco had some or has some program to encourage that. I don't know exactly how it works, but I would be interested in whether or not that's something we could look into.
We certainly could look into that.
And are you familiar with programs like that?
I am familiar with it. I'm just not familiar about our own specific. There may be something that we currently have. I don't believe it's any potential housing element program that we have currently within our existing housing element, nor within the proposed preliminary draft. But we may have some language, through the building division code that we can maybe take a look at and maybe combine in some fashion and include that in the housing element.
That's what I had for now, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Matt?
Question regarding process, because there's a couple of things that Mark mentioned there, and it seems to me staff could look at it, make it part of the draft. We're not voting on it, so we could, when it comes to us later down the line, we could look at what Mark proposed. It could be in there, and we could say, we don't like that, we vote against it, we take it out. But for now, it seems to me, this is we don't go to planning commission meetings, we don't go to, other kinds of public hearings, we avoid those. So I guess my question to you is, what is the process? Are our comments to be taken by staff, and then, if they seem reasonable, they investigate them, possibly put them in the next draft, or do we have to vote? Are we going to vote tonight on things we want to see done as a council?
Well, we're just going to vote to direct staff to submit this. So, I mean, maybe Jeff can shed some light on it. But
yeah, I think I understand what Matt's saying. It's really a question for the dais. Do you all want your individual comments included for now, or as a council, do you want to kind of have a straw poll and just include the comments where there's a majority tonight? Recognizing, I think, some of Mark's comments earlier are fairly complex. There's some study that's going to need to go on, and they could result in some general plan amendments and other work outside of the housing element. So, how do you want to proceed? I would think just a straw poll would probably be the best approach. That if everybody's more or less comfortable at this point, then let's go ahead and include the comments.
So then, to follow up on the city manager, if we sort of keep a running tally of what we're saying, and then we could go through them at the end and just, straw poll kind of thing, yay, nay. That'd be good. Okay. All right. He gives those jobs away, that's my understanding.
Cameron?
Excuse me. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to you and staff for all the hard work on this very voluminous document. I struggle a little bit about how to give feedback, or really how to engage on this particular process, because it feels very abstract to me. We don't actually build the homes ourselves. We create policies. And the housing element in many ways isn't itself a legal document. It sets policies that are then sort of codified in other legal documents and zoning and so forth. And then I'm sort of struck when I read the the accomplishments of the previous housing element, there's no real reference to actually the number of units that were built. You know, it's sort of, the accomplishment is that, yes, indeed, the policy is still useful for encouraging housing. So I wonder, I mean, that may just be the very nature of the business of creating housing policy. I would say that the document, as I've read it, is a good articulation of my general values around housing. What I wonder is, you know, and to Mark's earlier point, there's a question about, you know, generally, do we believe that the policy value statements are correct? And then there's just a question about efficacy of public policy. Because what we want, I believe that there is a shortage of housing in the San Francisco Bay Area, and particularly in the peninsula. And what we're looking for is, and there is a question here somewhere, what we're looking for is, you know, what can we do to help address that? And this feels very abstract from answering that question. And so maybe can you, as a professional planner and advice to elected council members, what is a good way to engage so that we can help achieve that goal?
That's a great question. And a lot of it has to do with the requirements that the state sets in place and how we are required to develop policies around those issues, specifically as it relates to any kind of constraint. So they take a very close look at our zoning ordinance. We have to spell out what our setbacks and height requirements are, and even what the entitlement process consists of. What are our fees? How much does it cost? You know, is there anything that we have on our books that's really a constraint towards the production of housing? But you are correct in the sense that the city doesn't build the housing. We pretty much set the table, put our regulations in place, and have a process and adjust our fees in a way that we hope aren't overburdening housing developers and affordable housing providers. In terms of what we can do, there's a lot in terms of what we can do, and I think where the rub really is taking a look at our zoning ordinance and where we allow housing, what our maximum number of stories, what, you know, lot coverage. We talked about that in the previous item.
And sorry to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
What I want to ask is, do you think that conversation is part of the housing element process, or is that a separate? Is that a separate sort of line of inquiry? And because I think generally, and in my experience over the past year, there have been a number of times in which council members have wanted to bring up housing as an issue that they care about. And I think we've generally been directed to say, hey, well, we have the housing element coming up, and we should be involved in that conversation. That's the place for that conversation. I think then when I engage with the housing element, I feel that it doesn't actually provide those specific strategies, which is fine, and it may be because this is a state document that we're required to construct, and it is. But I think what Mark is saying, and don't let me put words in your mouth, is there a second conversation, which are what are some tactical things that we can do that would likely have a real impact on housing in a 5 to 10 year time frame, and can we have that conversation?
Sure, and I think you moved up here because you wanted to probably add to something to what I was saying, but in terms of what we can do, I would say that the housing element is important because it lays the foundation for what we're going to look at and investigate. A lot of things require future studies and evaluation of other, you know, perhaps what other jurisdictions are doing, or how could we accomplish you know, removing some constraints or giving more incentives. So the housing element sets the foundation because it directs the city to carry out those studies, which would then be presented before decision-making bodies such as the council prior to their codification. And maybe it's less apparent in terms of the efforts and the strides that the city has made in the previous housing element or our current housing element. There were many action items to amend the city zoning ordinance to promote second units, to look at parking in mixed-use districts. We accomplished a lot of that. So I think maybe why it's not that apparent in this preliminary draft is because the city actually accomplished so much in the previous version. So there's not a lot of big changes to make, more fine-tuning. Did you want to add anything to that?
Sure,
you're welcome to.
Through the chair, if I may interject, that is also, I think, the answer to your question of inserting things in the housing element is what drives things to happen down the road.
try not to muck up this discussion, but the housing element covers a lot of issues from fair housing to energy conservation, et cetera. I think the critical issues, if you will, if I was going to say what they are, they kind of fall in 4 different categories to me. One is below market rate housing. How do you encourage below market rate housing as best you can, either through incentives or requirements? Secondly, how can you work with nonprofits? And that includes, like one of the suggestions that came up at the Planning Commission was to undertake an analysis of potential housing sites relative to the criteria used for the low-income housing tax credit funding. So then maybe, you're through city staff, you can work with nonprofits. Maybe it's a land donation or some other, creative way that a nonprofit can be involved. I think another key issue is how do you effectively and efficiently use your existing housing? And that would be things like second units, which allow seniors to stay in their home and provide flexibility in your housing. Another would be through the HIP housing, the home sharing program. That makes efficient use of housing. And then I think finally is how do you preserve the housing that you have that is affordable, and that could be related to potential displacement issues or rehabilitation of existing housing like you're undertaking with the 6 units, first-time homebuyer programs, rental assistance like the Section 8 and other programs, so that enable people who are who are at those lower income levels that work in hopefully local jobs can stay in the community. So I think it's really those 4 areas. And again, as Lisa said, you've done a lot with your zoning, you've done a lot with the regulations, and this is in many ways a tweaking, but I think it's those 4 areas that really stand out to me as the areas to think about in terms of where housing, how you want your housing strategies to apply in this community.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I guess I would just say, as somebody who loves numbers, and as somebody who's trying to get increasingly educated about this important and complicated topic, trying to understand, when I read this, in many ways it's listed as dozens of co-equal policy statements. And it's a little unclear where the emphasis should be placed and what is most effective. And so, again, I don't know if it's appropriate for this document, but I am interested to kind of continue to have the conversation about what are the sort of the most effective strategies and look at some actual data in terms of what we've accomplished over the past several years.
All right. Thank you. Matt?
Yeah. Lisa, could you put up that slide you had with the 7 items? Thanks. Thank you. So there's one that identifies sites for workforce housing that qualify, so on and so forth. Would there be any benefit when it comes to housing element and responding to the state and complying with the state to have something that's similar for retirement or, post home ownership type housing, meaning people that may want to sell their homes and then move into, some type of multifamily unit. I know, for instance, Belmont has a fair amount of that type of housing that they've built. It seems like a good idea, but I don't know that the state gives us any credit for it or whatever.
Are you talking maybe, is it different than assisted living? Just so in your scenario, you mentioned this would be rather than workforce housing for retired workforce. Is that
I guess, yeah, if you have to put some kind of label on it, quite frankly, I'm not sure what workforce housing is. Does that mean a guy that invests for his living is not workforce? I don't know. But anyways, I digress.
Yeah, we want to get it on tape.
So are you talking about like looking at locations where senior housing would be appropriate to do a study like that?
And it doesn't necessarily have to be assisted living, although it could be.
Right.
Again, I know Belmont at 6th Avenue has some senior housing, and I'm not sure if it's assisted or not. The Sunshine, which is over by Carlmont High School and Carlmont Shopping Center, my understanding of that complex is that it's a mix of where you want to be in terms of assisted living. Mm-hmm. So I suppose we could look at that, but mostly what I'm looking for is, something that adds to, that's in our housing element that helps the diversity of housing. And part of that diversity is, people who live in a single family home, they're now an empty nester, or even, maybe they've lost their husband or wife or whatever. And so it's just them, and they're still, in this single family home. They'd like to get rid of it, but they don't see any viable options in town, in San Carlos.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's an issue facing a lot of communities along the peninsula. But I think looking at where you can provide senior housing at, higher density senior housing in where you might have assisted living, I think could be a program that could be included in the housing element.
So it could be.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, and the state would look favorably on that, give us.
Sure. I don't think it's a make or break issue for the state, but I think if it's important for this community, I think it's important.
Exactly. Okay. And then when I was looking at the thing about house sharing, Lisa, I wasn't sure if we have anything. I know we have things in our code when we did the zoning and everything about second units and so forth, but anything that maybe doesn't get quite that far where you're creating a second unit, but where, again, if you had a senior couple or a single senior person who wants to do home sharing but doesn't necessarily want to, share the kitchen and so forth, and wanted to put in either for themselves a unit that included a kitchenette, or for the person that is going to come in and share the home, a kitchenette for them to use, so that they're not, some of these facilities within the home, they're not necessarily sharing. Do we do enough in our zoning to allow for that?
Maybe not the exact scenario that you just described. Mm-hmm. It sounds like maybe it's for someone who maybe wants to share their home and maybe provide some separation in how you carry out your daily life by having a separate kitchenette. In our code, as you're probably familiar with, we have standards specific to second units. So we don't really kind of have something in between per se, which this sounds like. I know that with HIP housing and the home sharing, that they're promoting, they really have a formalized system whereby people who are actually looking for someone to share, in their home, or for someone who's looking to move into a home where they're sharing it, they provide a more formalized way to match people looking to live in those particular environments. But we don't have, anything between. Our second unit is either something that's detached with its own bathroom and kitchen, and it has its own standards, or it could be detached. But in terms of, I suppose, we see lots of things with the way homes are being built today. Someone could put in an additional kitchen, perhaps, or a small little kitchenette, like you say. So I don't think there's anything to prevent that, but it's not directly written in as a way to promote, more of I guess it would facilitate a home sharing environment. But, that's something that we could look at and at least make sure that people are aware that it could be allowed under certain conditions.
I think that would be good. Say, I wouldn't want to do something that, creates an impediment, because getting a second unit, you have to go through some hoops to do that. But if to make sure that in our code we didn't have anything that was an impediment to someone doing that without launching into the realm of second unit. And at the same time, if we had some kind of policy statement in our housing element, again, that says to the state, hey, here's an area we're trying to make an effort to open up home share opportunities.
Bob.
I just had a technical question on that same sheet there, the 7. Number 2, you say, well, actually, number 1, 1.7, and I find it, and it's in blue, and 5.5 is in blue. But when I get to page 19, I'm confused. So it's not in blue. There's no blue there. I don't know what we're doing there.
Oh, some is in blue and some is in red, and it's just the way the document, I should have mentioned that. Sorry if that's confusing. It's when you do edits
I can see some is in blue and red, but those two specifically. But it says public amenities for higher density housing. Ensure that adequate public amenities and services are available for high density multifamily housing in the downtown area and El Camino Real while being sensitive to surrounding uses. That's for affordable housing only? Because that's what 3.2 says.
Is it? Right, that's correct. Right, so on page 19, action, that's right.
On page 19.
On page 19, action HOU-3.2, where it's talking about providing incentives for higher density mixed-use housing development.
No, it doesn't say that. I just read it to you.
At the bottom.
3.3? No, I'm sorry.
I see. I apologize. I'm reading policy 3.2. I'm sorry.
Oh,
it's
right.
action 3.2. I'm sorry.
That's okay, I know.
Okay,
I have to check
it.
myself where I'm
Never
at all
mind.
the time.
I'm asleep. I'd like to turn this off. There it is again. Let me turn it off. Wait.
All right.
One.
Okay, did you get all your questions answered, Bob?
You may have just launched a nuclear missile, too.
Okay.
I'm right there with you.
Thank you, Lisa. This is a public hearing, and we do have a speaker slip, Ronnie McClure.
Cameron brought up a good point. It sounds good, and in generalities, I worry when I read about the inventory and how we're going to meet this, and it's all perfect. We have enough in this draft ordinance. Well, we have enough if the zoning is followed, but when you cut down, like at Transit Village, you cut the density from 300 down to 202 units. Well, that's almost 100 units. And at 15% for affordable housing, that's 15 units you just lost. If you do that, and that's that's transit-oriented, right at the train station. If you do that consistently with where we have zoning that calls for higher density and higher heights, and the Planning Commission and the councilmen go ahead and cut the density, we're not going to meet this plan. And I know the state doesn't have a penalty, and we go on making all these plans that look good, but we don't build the units. And I'm very concerned about that. And that's the follow-through. And the follow-through is really by Planning Commission and by the council making sure that you're doing what this plan says. So I'm very concerned about that. And the thing is that in answer to you, Matt, on the housing, on the HIP housing, I have had experience in that, two different experiences. One very positive, one that was not so good. But it's a wonderful way for people that like other people, and I'm not exactly the sociable type, so it depends. So when you interview the person that's going to come live in your home, you have to really, know what you're doing. So, but it works, and you're not going against any code because you're not providing a second stove. It's the cooking unit that makes the difference. And so, but of course I've had my second unit and the family living in it now for 4.5 years, and it's great, you know. So I do say the practical applications of this can be very positive, but it's up to you guys to make sure that you follow through on the density.
Thank you, Bonnie. All right, does anyone else wish to speak on this item? All right. We need a motion to close the public hearing. No, we don't. All right. All right. Discussion?
I think we need a motion.
Or just need a motion? I keep forgetting that we got to have a motion
Mr. Mayor, I move
first.
to direct staff to submit the preliminary draft housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for review.
Second.
All right. It's been moved in second. Now, do we have any discussion? I'm not seeing anybody. So.
We have to do the straw poll.
Oh, all right.
With the comments we had.
All right.
Wasn't Lisa keeping track of the?
Yeah.
Or rather, I know we asked Jeff to, and Jeff
That's what her
delegated.
boss
Yeah,
said.
I'm sorry, they're not paying attention. Lisa? Yeah, okay, they're double checking your list.
Okay.
We'll be with you momentarily.
All right.
You mean they're checking it twice? To see who's naughty and who's not. That was last month.
You're right, that was last month.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure we were both on the same page here. So we wrote down a height bonus, looking at the potential to have policy language to allow a bonus in the terms of height for affordable housing unit projects, some way to encourage earthquake safety rehabilitation.
No.
Okay, so the first one is the height bonus for affordable units.
But didn't you say you wanted market units plus affordable units?
Yes, in other words, it was to encourage more affordable units to allow more units, provided that more affordable
So if you give more
units were
affordable,
built.
then you get more market.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, I concur with Mr. Olbert.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, thanks, City Manager. Some way to encourage earthquake safety rehabilitation.
Yes. Good idea. Sure.
Taking a look at senior housing and looking at senior housing in higher density locations. This had to do with, I think, the issue Councilmember Grocott brought up about potential for ensuring provisions for retirement housing / senior housing. We can look at what viable options there may be for that with respect to that type of housing type.
I'm sorry, did you say senior housing in higher density or and higher density?
Well, what we thought we heard was looking, well, not necessarily, well, did we say higher density specifically? Multifamily. And multifamily designations. I guess we'll strike higher density. I mean, maybe in a way that's higher density, but we'll be specific and say multifamily.
All right.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
And then to promote more home sharing opportunities, look at language that would allow or facilitate separate cooking facilities within a unit and not as an independent, second unit, the second unit ordinance. Exactly.
Yep. All right.
And I believe that's it, just the 4.
Yep.
If I may, I think there was actually another one that was Cameron put in that was kind of sneaky, and I won't put words in his mouth, but didn't you want a little bit more data in the plan about the numbers of the accomplishments?
I would.
To the extent it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, to the degree that that data is accessible, I don't want to send staff, into the archives if it's not useful. But I really, what I would like to see is
like a scorecard.
Well, I would like the accomplishment section. Ostensibly, the housing element is for us to provide adequate housing, but the accomplishment section doesn't speak to our ability to do that. So I would like to see some numbers as to whether or not we're actually doing that.
And that's something that staff can provide. It's not new data. We have it, so we can certainly do that.
Can that incorporate basically, I mean, I think this is what Cameron is saying as well, is sort of a progress chart. Where were we 5 years ago, 3 years ago, last year?
Exactly.
Expectation,
Sure.
you know, like a bar graph or,
Yeah, we
or
can do that.
whatever. All right.
Anyone opposed?
All right. You got your marching orders?
Do we need a vote, right?
Now we need a vote.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right. Next item, 10B, consideration of authorizing a request for proposal for purchase and installation of one fixed automated license plate reader, ALPR, and one mobile ALPR to address specific crime problems.
Good
Chief
evening,
Rothfuss.
Mayor Collins, members of the City Council. Greg Rothfuss, Police Chief. Approximately 12 weeks ago, I came before the council with the same exact request that you have before you tonight. And during that council meeting, the council voted 3-2 against the proposal. Since that time, recently council has asked to bring this item back, and so it is now back before you. As you recall from the staff report and from the last presentation, the license plate readers are simply optical character readers. They're designed to read license plates, to store that data in a very secure database, and then that data is then used by law enforcement to conduct investigations, to locate missing persons, missing children, basically clear innocent parties, and anything that we can do with respect to that data as it relates to our law enforcement reach. Since that time, say during the last 30 days, we've had a local success story with license plate readers. San Mateo had a robbery in their community. They were able to get a license plate reader. This occurred in December. They were able to get a license plate. A witness was. That vehicle came back to Madera, and it was registered out of a home in Madera. But they ran the license plate through the ALPR system and found out that license plate had during the month been at a particular address on Rollison Road on 2 occasions. So they sent the police out to the Rollison Road address, thinking that the car might be there, and the car was there, and the suspects were there, and they were arrested. So that's our recent success story with that. There are some concerns clearly with respect to license plate readers, and many of them that I've heard of lately, really I hope I can set your mind at ease with respect to some of them. One has to do with the security of the data. The data is housed in the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. It's in a secure facility, and on top of that layered, because it is in a secure system. That data, concerns about that data being given or sold to the public in any way, that is not done. That data is for law enforcement purposes only and is not given to the public. That somehow the data or the collection of this data violates the Constitution. In fact, that's not true. The courts have ruled that license plate data is in fact constitutional. Other systems, for example, GPS tracking on cars require warrants. Putting GPS tracking on a vehicle without a warrant is not constitutional. License plate readers are real constitutional. Concerns about using this data to track innocent parties, and it's not the goal of law enforcement to track innocent parties. And also concerned that somehow this data will be used when people are exercising their First Amendment rights to free speech by attending certain rallies, by having certain religious beliefs or whatnot. And obviously there's strict prohibitions against using it for that. One of the issues that came up last time had to do with respect to the retention of the data and the length of time by which it could be retained or that it should be retained. My recommendation was then and still is at the time that the data should be retained for a year. As I outlined in the staff report, it can take that long sometimes for criminal investigation to come to fruition. And sometimes it doesn't matter how many resources you throw at a criminal investigation. It's just not going to break for a number of reasons for a particular period of time, or a serial crime pattern might take a while to break. And so it could take up to a year, and that's the recommendation. I believe that most of the agencies that are in the NCRIC are leaving data there for a year, but some aren't. Some are choosing 6 months, some have chosen in 3 months. And then the last bit of update with respect to the system is that if the council does approve the system today, the NCRIC will provide I've spoken with the NCRIC, and they are willing to provide the vehicle license plate reader for free. So there'll be no charge for that. So we're looking at, it's basically half the cost estimate right now, because we would just be getting the poll reader if that's what the council approved. So that's all for my presentation tonight, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions of Chief Rothus. Cameron?
Thank you, Chief. I got a question from a resident that I thought was a good one, which is, does the sheriff's office collect data in an automated way in any other respect? Or is this a unique situation, unique policy?
Well, we have access to lots of automated data. We have access to automated databases, including license databases, criminal history databases.
But do you collect data? Like a surveillance, this is sort of a surveillance, or, you know, you have a piece of technology out there that's collecting data, putting it in a database. Does that kind of thing happen in any other respect?
You know, not in this regard. I can tell you, for example, you know, because I want to be accurate, when we do speed surveys, we collect the data in terms of how fast people were going, how many times, and that there's no name or plate associated with that, but we collect that kind of data.
Aggregate,
yeah, so we collect it that way. We obviously have a records management system where we collect data regarding persons who are arrested and contacted by the police, not under surveillance, but it's more of a...
So every time you fill out a report,
there's data.
And how long do our reports retain for?
It depends on the nature of the report.
Okay.
It could be infinite, you know, forever if it's a homicide case,
right?
Or it could be as little as 3 to 5 years for an information report.
What about a traffic citation?
Traffic citations, they're obviously still they're carried in your license record, automated license record, up until a certain period of time, and we store them at the sheriff's office. And I'm sorry, I do not know exactly how long we store them.
Okay.
Multiple years.
Through the chair, I thought, isn't there? It might be inaccurate to describe it as retaining it, but I thought in conversations we had earlier, Chief, offline, hadn't you indicated to me that there are like video cameras of public areas where that video footage is accessible if need be? So somebody is storing it someplace?
That's true, but we don't have that. The sheriff's office doesn't have that, but one of the first things we'll do at a crime scene is we'll start knocking on, if we had, let's say, for example, and we have had street robberies in San Carlos or whatnot, we start knocking on doors and see who has cameras inside and outside businesses to see if we can get that video footage. That's a very common now because there's so much, but they're not ours.
Sorry, Jeff, were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I believe there are some county facilities in those types of public spaces, including the one we're in right now, where the little camera in the corner is recording us.
So I think the resident was bringing up the point, which I think is a good one, which is that with the growth of technology, this is probably not the last kind of surveillance technology. The point that was being made is that, there isn't really an overarching policy about data retention around this piece of technology or potential future pieces of technology that kind of come up. So one of the things that we're making a decision about the license plate readers, but in some ways we may be setting some kinds of precedents about just data retention in general. And I wondered if you could kind of comment about that. Is there larger thinking about, surveillance data retention beyond just a case-by-case basis? Is there overarching policy? Is the sheriff's office thinking about this kind of stuff?
It'd be very difficult to have an overarching policy on data retention simply because the law requires data retention for different lengths of period of time depending upon the data. It prohibits the elimination of data in some cases. It mandates the elimination of data in others. It says that you must keep it for X amount of years in some cases. And in some cases, like with respect to ALPRs, there's really only guidelines. And in this case, it's the California State Attorney General's office whose guideline is 1 year. It's not being followed consistently in that some are doing it for longer and some are doing it for shorter period of time. But I certainly hear you with respect to concerns about consistency and where that's going. But and sometimes the data is apples and oranges. There's just different rules around it.
Yeah, I think it's when the biggest concern is about surveillance of the general public.
Correct.
if that's license plate readers, video cameras were brought up, you guys could start buying drones and flying them, or I don't know what. So anyway, I hear what you're saying. I guess I would encourage and would be interested beyond this specific topic. I would, in the growth of kind of cheap available surveillance technology, I would encourage the sheriff's office to establish some policies about general data retention rather than it being a hodgepodge.
Thank you. Bob?
I just want to get a clarification, and again, the conversation last time seemed to go this way, and certainly tonight the words seem to go this way. Isn't the item on the agenda to request for a proposal for the purchase of these items? And isn't that mean that it's going to come back to us again to see if we want to purchase them? Goes out again. I love it. Yeah, just like he and I were connected. Yeah.
Did I just? Yeah. Okay. So I got to talk, and then you get to talk, and then I get to talk.
It was designed that way.
Yes and no. We are asking you to approve the issuance of an RFP, but really what we're looking for is this policy direction, because I believe that the price tag associated with these and the various grants that we're going to get are going to fall within my threshold to approve. So that's not likely. The contract isn't likely to come back to the council.
And can I add to it? Would and also it's kind of we're waiting to see what the council would say. They might say, hey, before we do the RFP, we would like 3 cameras, we would like 4, we would like 1. So we have to wait till the guidance comes by how much you want to spend.
Sure. And again, I'm just trying to understand, because this to me says it's coming back around again, and you're indicating that it's not coming around again.
Right now, I don't think it would come back to you.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. I've got a couple of questions. I forwarded you an email that I got over the weekend from a local attorney, and he seems to know a lot about this. He says that he serves on the State Bar's Cyberspace Committee, and he believes that, once the data is recorded, that it doesn't stay there. He says because it's sold to data brokers who make it available for a price on the internet. How would you answer that?
I don't know how to answer that except to say that it's just I don't understand where he got that. I don't know where he heard that, and that's not what occurs. That data is, first of all, it is in a secure facility that requires a secret clearance to be able to enter, or if you enter, you must be badged and you must be somebody who's cleared. Once you've done that, in order to get into the system, you have to go through training, you have to sign off, you have to have legitimate law enforcement purposes. That data is programmed to disappear at the end of whatever period the council says they want to keep it, 3 months, 6 months, or a year. It goes away unless it's being used for law enforcement purposes, and it is never sold or given to the public. The only exception to that could be in the case of a domestic violence or stalking incident, and we are concerned as a law enforcement agency that the suspect in this case, where the suspect has traveled, could be close to the victim in that case. We will work with that victim to provide some data that this person is around, but other than that, that's the only time that data is released to anybody but law enforcement.
The other thing that I had a question about, somebody brought up this, another resident made the statement, and I don't know where she got the information, but she said only about a third of large cities' forces have these readers, although I read something else that said that 70% of all law enforcement have these readers. What are the facts?
The facts are we have about 1,200 agencies in the United States that have these readers, about 5,000 of the agencies worldwide. The last I checked, there was somewhere around 70% of the agencies that were surveyed, not all agencies, but the agencies that were surveyed had license plate readers, and of those, approximately 85% of those agencies were looking to increase their programs. So they are prolific, they're getting more so. And the more success stories there are, you'll see them being used more and more in law enforcement. And the fact that it's difficult, if not impossible, to point to the incidents of misuse is another reason that you can see this program growing.
Is there any evidence that you are aware of that demonstrates that it has been these readers have been successful in depressing crime in one area, but maybe increasing it in adjacent areas that don't have the technology? Is there any evidence to that?
There is evidence that the placement of cameras has decreased crime in a particular area. That occurred with the city of Piedmont, and that was presented, I think, last time at the council meeting where they experienced a severe drop in crime. But there's no evidence that I'm aware of that would say that then pushed crime into Oakland and created higher crime rates in Oakland or in other areas. I haven't seen that. It's not that it didn't happen. I've just not seen that.
Right. And then I read recently that Oakland had apparently a significant drop in crime over the last year or two.
I've read that as well.
Have they been able to quantify that drop in crime or attribute any of that to license plate readers?
I don't know.
Okay. Is that some kind of information that we could probably get at some point? I mean, how are you going to evaluate this when you come back?
We could do that. We can look at these programs throughout. We could look at the Piedmont's program and Oakland's programs, assuming we go forward with ours too. We could look at ours and do all of that. We could certainly monitor all of those things. In some cases, it might be able to pretty be easily to find a direct correlation between a drop in crimes and ALPRs. In other cases, it may not. They may be going hand in hand, but the correlation, you may not be able to find it for whatever reason.
Right.
So.
Right. I mean, we've all gotten correspondence, I'm pretty sure, from a lot of skeptics about this. And I mean, if we go forward with this, I want to be able to point to something down the road that's just, it's working, and it was a worthwhile investment on our part. So I would hope that somehow we can get that data, even if it's, crime didn't go up. I mean, I saw something that said that there had been 13 burglaries in the first 12 days of the year. Was that
my apologies
correct?
for that. It was 13 robberies last year.
Oh, last year. Okay.
And so that was my fault. And because we'd be on, like I said, 400 robberies for the year, that's probably more than Oakland, and we're just not going to have that.
So it was a little
my
scary
apologies.
to read.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments, Mark?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Or questions, I mean.
Yeah, just one comment and one question for the chief. The comment, Mr. Mayor, is doing an analysis that would show causality between license plate readers and lower crime could be really difficult to do. Tracking how it's used to get, to indict somebody, that might be a lot easier. So I just want to mention that to you. I think that may be a standard you'd be asking staff to try and follow that they would have difficulty achieving. Chief, you mentioned that the San Mateo example where there had been an arrest recently. Do you happen to know roughly in the period of time that how many images were captured? How many license plates were read?
No, I don't. I just know that particular license plate had been seen on a street in Redwood City on 2 occasions.
The reason I ask is because when you mentioned that, I was reminded there's an article, I think it was in the Daily Post not too long ago, where Menlo Park had instituted a license plate reader program some time ago. And I thought I recalled seeing an article that they too had an example of an arrest that was traceable to it, and they indicated in the article that it was something slightly over, I think it was like 250,000 license plate images that had been captured in the time period that also included the one arrest. So I just was curious what the San Mateo experience was.
And I think even with the systems being what they are, I think you'll see arrest rates go up as law enforcement becomes familiar how to use them. I think there are detectives out there who may not even check an ALPR database on a partial plate or something like that. They're not very familiar with it. We're still getting our wheels under us with respect to using the data as an investigative resource and tying it into other investigative resources.
Mr. Mayor, do we need to take a motion to extend the meeting for a few minutes?
I believe we do. Anybody want to make a motion?
I would move that we extend the meeting till 10:40.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? I did not hear that. Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions? We do have, we did have a speaker card from Robert Stafford, but
I can, Mr. Stafford asked me if I would just pass on his comments of support on this item to the council. He couldn't stay to the very end. He stayed as long as he could.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Anybody else wish to speak? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize the request for proposal for the purchase and installation of one fixed automated license plate reader and one mobile automated license plate reader.
Second.
All right. Discussion.
I'm still opposed. I was opposed before, and I still am. If you'll entertain this, I'd like to play a little piece here for you to hear for starting out.
Bugged Mr. Blake's sound.
Can you hear that?
We bugged the sound with our own tape recorder. Just look.
Where's the mic coming in?
I'm not permitted. Papa, you don't understand.
Opie, I can't listen to this. Now, I told you about eavesdropping.
But Paul, this is different.
Yes, it's worse. You overheard a conversation that was supposed to be private. Now, I can't be a party to that.
But Paul, if you just listen to this.
Opie, I can't listen.
Paul, you're erasing the tape.
That's what I mean to do. You bugged a conversation between a lawyer and his client. Now, that's violating one of the most sacred rights of privacy.
But Paul.
No buts.
But if it helps the law.
Opie, the law can't use this kind of help. Because whether a man is guilty or innocent, we have to find that out by due process of law.
So that's obviously from the old TV show where a different police officer or law enforcement felt differently. It's been said that this kind of use of technology is okay by the Constitution, but I would remind the council that the Supreme Court one time made a ruling called Plessy. It was a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, and they upheld the separation of services in public places for black people versus white people. The Supreme Court doesn't always get it right. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution reads that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. There's no exceptions given. And no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. And I would key on that word seize, because when you take a picture of anybody's license plate, what you're doing is you're seizing information. Now, the city manager said at the last time we looked at this, or I believe it might have been in his follow-up email to us where he told the council he disagreed with our decision, made the point that when you're in the public, on the road, for instance, there's no expectancy of privacy, and I disagree. If you're driving your vehicle on the road or walking down the sidewalk and you get stopped by an officer, there's an expectation of privacy. You have a right to say to that officer, am I being detained? And if so, for what purpose? Am I being arrested? If not, I'm on my way. An officer can't stop you just because you're in your car on a public road and search your vehicle. They can't do that. Why? Because the Fourth Amendment extends over to your property being your car. You still have an expectation of privacy. If you're walking down the sidewalk, your person, with your person, you have an expectation of privacy. So I disagree that we are allowed to do this. Fundamentally, this is about government gathering information on its citizens, and in a criminal case, there's two ways for the government to gather information on its citizens. One, the citizen volunteers the information. Two, they get a warrant. And in a warrant, there are 5 things that must be present, must be elements in order to do reasonable search and seizure. One is the proper warrant. Number 2 is it has to be based on probable cause. Number 3, it has to be supported by an oath before a common law court. Number 4, it has to particularly describe the place to be searched. And if there's no description, then there's nothing they can do. And the person or things to be seized, again, same, there has to be a description of it. So what I see here is the government gathering information on innocent citizens and treating them like criminals. I think that's wrong. This isn't anything new. This isn't just because of technology. In 1761, James Otis defended a case of merchants before the Superior Court of Massachusetts against warrantless searches. Writs of assistance, they were called, that the king put in place so that he could enforce his acts of trade, things that were known as the Intolerable Acts, the Stamp Act, etc. He worked for the king. He was supposed to enforce these, and he quit, and he defended the citizens. William Penn said, necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. And that's what we're being told here. This is necessary to fight crime. No, it isn't. You know, I had, from my property, and the police know this, I had 4 bicycles stolen from my property over a 3-year period. Never once did an officer advise me that a license plate reader would be installed at the corner of Holly and Walnut or San Carlos Avenue and Walnut. No, the advice I was given was somehow to better secure my bikes and or get a security camera for my property. The solution, if there are burglaries at Best Buy, Home Depot, etc., is for those businesses and property owners to install security cameras on their property. Then you don't have the violation of the Fourth Amendment. What, after all, does the Sheriff Department have if they have a picture of someone's license plate because they drove out of San Carlos on a day a crime took place? They have nothing more than circumstantial evidence, not to mention ill-gotten evidence. So I still hold the position I had before. I think this is wrong. I don't think we should be doing it. And I would hope that the other council members would see, as Cameron referenced, we're headed down a slippery slope if we do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Mark?
Matt, I congratulate you for an interesting Fourth Amendment argument. Some of the details of which I have to admit, I hadn't thought of myself before. It will be interesting to see how this whole situation unfolds in the courts. The law over what is reasonable to look at and observe versus not is a complex one. I come to essentially the same conclusion as Matt. I was opposed to this before, at least with the data being retained for a year. And since that apparently I think is still the proposal, I am therefore opposed to it still. I basically feel that even if it is something that turns out to be valid or held to be valid by the courts, that just means that it's legal. It doesn't necessarily mean that we ought to rush in and do it. And my feeling and the feeling of a number of people I've talked to is, in a word, it just really creeps a lot of people out, the idea that they would be under observation like that for no particular reason. So I know I said a lot more things the last time we had this before us. In the interest of time, since we're pushing up on 10:40, I'm not going to go into it any further, but you know, unless somebody's willing to propose a shorter retention period, I'm still opposed to this.
We probably ought to have a motion to extend the meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move we extend the meeting to,
have some consent items.
Yeah, I know that I'm trying to figure that out, 11 o'clock.
I second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'll oppose. I want to get out of here.
All right,
This
well,
is ridiculous.
All right.
What's ridiculous is when people. Yeah, never mind. Let's go. I call the
Cameron.
question. We call the question?
Well, we have at least one more person who wants to speak.
In deference to my colleague, I'll simply say I supported this last time. I'm going to support it again. I think that it's a tool that's going to marginally help public safety, improve public safety, and I think the chances of there being problems with data misuse are exceptionally small. Last thing I would say, I just want to disagree with one thing that Matt said, which is Matt, every time you get pulled over, and I've done a ride along, the first thing the cop does is he runs the plate through the plate reader. Whether that's you have a tail light out, whether he just doesn't like the look of the car. Every community in the entire country has a plate reader. The key word here is automated. And to me, this is simply a question of efficiency. It doesn't necessarily change the nature of what's been done for over a generation. So I support it, and I'm going to vote for it.
All right. Since I'm the one that brought this back, what I would like to propose is that we try this out for a period of at least 6 months, and I would also like to propose that we only store the data for 6 months. We review it in 6 months and see whether or not we all believe that it is doing what it was intended to do. I don't know if Mr. Olbert, if that is enough to satisfy his concerns, but as I said before, I was on the fence on this before I erred to the side of caution. I've learned enough about how the data is stored and kept secure that I'm enough more comfortable with it to vote for it, but only with these restrictions. Maybe at some point in the future I will be I'm more comfortable with keeping the data longer, but I really and that's one of the reasons I asked the questions I did, because I want to see how it's working. Is there some reliable data that we can point to that tells us that we really ought to continue it? So that would be my suggestion, that we
offer that as a friendly amendment.
Yeah, I guess I have to offer that as an amendment.
And can you specify exactly what the amendment is?
All right, so the amendment would be that the data be kept only for 6 months, and that we have a 6-month report. After 6 months, 6 months after the ALPRs are installed, that we get a report from Chief Rothus as to how it's working.
I'd be happy to accept that amendment.
Through the chair, I don't necessarily have a problem, but shouldn't we? I would suggest that perhaps we say we would hold it for a review. In other words, the 6 months I get, but not necessarily destroy the evidence until we please the mayor with his comments. Otherwise, what could happen is 6 months could come, we couldn't have a meeting, and the information goes out the door, and then all of a sudden you go, "That's a great idea. We should keep it longer." But we didn't.
Well, but not all the information goes out. It's just for that first day, right? Because it's on a rolling basis.
Okay, I didn't realize it was on a rolling basis, Chief. I just want to make sure that we don't cut off our nose to spite our face. I'll agree to the friendly amendment if Mr.
I agree as well.
All right, Mr. Johnson does.
All right. So we have a motion as amended. All right. Call the question.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? No. Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right. Moving on to, I guess we should talk about we should bring back the items that were on consent calendar.
Yes.
So we have, first item was...
Martin and Associates.
Yep, Neil Martin. 8E, adopt a resolution authorizing amendment to the current professional services agreement with Neil Martin and Associates through fiscal year 2016-2017 to account for an increase in services for a new position to staff and the city manager special projects team, and an associated budget adjustment in the amount of $40,000 additional for increased senior planner hours.
So, if I may, I believe this item was asked to be pulled by a member of the public who's no longer here, who wished to express his support for the planners and share with the council his feeling that, as a person who does a lot of work with the planning department, that the workload is significantly increased, and if we want to keep pace with our goals and objectives of processing applications in a timely period, this would be a way to do it.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of item 8E.
I second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. Crystal?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right, item 8F, adopt a resolution appropriating $40,000 for financial consulting services in preparation for potential revenue measure.
So I have a question on that. Would that be an effect to the Black Mountain property if we were to be looking at the purchase of that for making it a park and so forth?
If that were the issue that the council wanted to move forward with a bond measure, then it would apply. It would apply to any bond measure.
Right.
And so what we're proposing
for that particular issue to move forward, it moves under that umbrella of
That's
bond
correct.
measure and so forth. Okay. Very good.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve item 8F.
Second.
All right. Crystal?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right, item 8G, approve four funding grants totaling $100,000 to support local affordable housing programs and policies, and authorize the city manager to execute contracts with Parka, Envision Shelter Network, HIP Housing, and Mid-Penn Housing Corporation for affordable housing services. I pulled this, not because I am opposed to it or anything. I just think $100,000 is too low. I believe that we should increase that number to at least 250,000. Tonight's probably not the appropriate time to talk about that, but I would like to see if there is desire to have a discussion about increasing that in the future. I don't know, maybe would we do that potentially at a strategic planning session?
Or in the budget cycle.
Or the budget cycle?
Yeah, those would be the most obvious examples, either as part of the strategic plan that would probably simply point you to the budget cycle.
Okay.
We're just at the very beginning of a 2-year budget right now, so you will have a mid-cycle review in the May timeframe, which would be another opportunity.
All right, well, I'll
or you could bring it back as a standalone item.
All right, maybe we do it at mid-year budget review, and I'll plead my case then, considering the hour.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of item 8G.
I second.
All right, Crystal?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right, with that, I believe we adjourn to closed session.
And we ended the meeting early.
We did.
Technically, the closed session is part of your meeting. It's kind of an unusual step. So you probably, if we're going to go beyond 11, we'll need to extend to cover the time for the closed session.
Is the closed session timely? Do we have to do it tonight?
It does not have to be done tonight.
No. I would be in favor of postponing it personally, but I don't know how others feel.
Is there any kind of a time frame?
This is, however, as I recall, one of the items that we cannot do in one of our special meetings. Is that correct?
It has to be a regular meeting.
So we have to do like we did with Mr. Maltby's review and either start at 7 and go out to closed session at 8 or do the end of the meeting.
All right, is there a desire to then to put it off to the next meeting? All right, do we need a vote?
I've heard two people. This end of the dais seems to agree with that, and that end of the dais seems to be quiet.
I proposed it to initially.
I'm supportive of postponing.
Sounds like you got plenty of support.
Okay. So
now you can adjourn it.
We're adjourned.
We are adjourned.